everyone, and welcome to this meeting of Inner West Council. It's just turned 6:30, so we'll make a start. There may be others coming up, but we will get underway. And first of all, as always, I will acknowledge that we're meeting tonight on the land of the Gadigal and Wongal people of the Eora Nation, and acknowledge that we are meeting on their country and acknowledge their elders past and present. Just like to let people know that in the spirit of open, accessible, transparent government, council meetings of Inner West Council are streamed live on Council's website. The camera is focused on the front of the chamber and not on speakers from the public. However, by speaking at a council meeting, members of the public agree to being voice recorded, must ensure their speech to the council is respectful and uses appropriate language. Person using defamatory, discriminatory or offensive language may be exposed to liability, for which council takes no responsibility, and that equally applies to me, and I'll give an undertaking to behave in an appropriate manner also. Any part of the meeting that is held in closed session, which will not be the case tonight, but will not be streamed, but will be recorded for the purpose of verifying the accuracy of the minutes. In relation to declarations of interest, I declare I have no declaration of interest in any of the matters listed on the business paper. And I do move and declare carried the minutes of the council meeting, which was held on the 6th of December. I should let people know that the meeting is conducted and governed by the Code of Meeting Practice of the former Leichhardt Council. And of particular relevance, this allows people to and actively encourages open council meetings where members of the public can speak for up to 3 minutes on items listed on the agenda, and an extension of up to 1 minute may be allowed if necessary. We have conducted a voluntary registration system for tonight's meeting in order to manage the meeting efficiently. So those people who registered will be given priority in the speaking order when the agenda item is discussed, and then any other people who wish to speak to the item may speak. So we have an agenda which has 16 items on it, I think. There is an additional administrator's minute which was issued around about midday, 1 o'clock today, probably nearer 2 o'clock actually, that relates to the WestConnex dive site proposals which Sydney Motorway Corporation has under consideration. I'm proposing to deal with that administrator's minute first, and just by way of introduction, I'll say that Council did a customer satisfaction survey recently, and part of it was determining attitude of our residents to WestConnex. 57% of our residents are opposed to WestConnex, so it's my job to represent those interests and those views to government. When you dig a little deeper, the main reason people object to WestConnex in the Inner West local government area is because they think the project is poorly planned. And I think the recent surfacing of the dive site options that Sydney Motorway Corporation is proposing in the Leichhardt area is, to me, an example of a project that is sort of being made up on the run. There is a $16 billion road from Western Sydney to the airport and to the city, but there are elements of it that are being made up in, to me, a relatively haphazard way, and this is, I think, one of the great issues that the community has a problem with, that suddenly something emerges in their suburb that they knew nothing about, and which will have significant impacts for maybe 3 or 4 years, like these dive sites, and it's not something that they'd contemplated through the planning of WestConnex. So I get the community sentiment strongly about the seeming unplanned nature of WestConnex, and the minute that's put up tonight has a number of recommendations, particularly aimed at trying to prevent the 2 sites that Sydney Motorway Corporation has on the table. It's one at 7 Darley Road and one at 29 Derbyshire Road, from being actively further contemplated as dive sites due to the significant impacts that will occur. And we have released a consultant's report that Council commissioned that I have to say is fairly scathing in relation to both those sites. So the recommendations, I think everyone has a copy of the administrator's minute, or at least access to it. The motion, the recommendations are before you on the screen there, but I would invite, in fact, have we got any people registered to speak on this item, Tanya? No? So we have people who are registered to speak on the WestConnex update report, which is item 1. But I guess what I will do is ask if there are sorry? We do have 2 people registered to speak on the Administrator's Minute of WestConnex, and one's Catherine Gemmell, and the other is Christine Valentine. So I'd invite Catherine, or Christine, take a pick to speak first on this item.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. I just want to reiterate some of the points that you made, and I do thank you and the Council for continuing the fight against the WestConnex project. And it is so ill planned. To consider putting a dive site near a school is clearly ridiculous, with the number of truck movements, the conflict between school children and parents, and the need to work long hours excavating that site. Just to point out how ill-planned it is, to reinforce the point you made, it came through the Floodplain Management Committee, which I chaired at the last meeting, that the WestConnex has not done adequate flood planning for the exits to its tunnels. They're proposing exits to the tunnels, and this dive site might be in a similar position, that are on flood-prone land, and unless they do proper flood mitigation, the tunnels themselves will become the detention tanks for the floodwater that can occur. Similarly, at the Sydenham end, where not only the WestConnex project is having to exit a portal there, but also the Sydney Metro Rail project. And it came to our attention there, and I know that you've been asked to write to the local members, that these two authorities are not in communication in terms of their flood planning. It got to the ridiculous extent that there's a huge city water facility there that retains floodwaters, and the Metro project wants to build a rail stabling yard on top of it, which seems clearly ridiculous to me. And then they said, oh, we'll simply move that, which means you'd have to repipe the whole of
Thank you. Yes, please. If you could just state your name and suburb. Thanks.
Thank you. Leslie Treleaven from Camperdown. Good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to this motion. I've observed with great interest the way in Leichhardt Council has explored and then supported the opposition to these two dive sites in Leichhardt. Unlike the Leichhardt group and the dialogues with WestConnex and with Leichhardt Council, since the change from an exit at Sydney University, there has been proposed a tunnel that will go from Rozelle to St Peters that is 8 lanes wide, and we'll have a dive site on that loop, which is quite distinct from the loops that have been already explored by Council. We're concerned that the core, or Camperdown residents aware of WestConnex, is way behind where local residents from Leichhardt are, because we've received no information, no consultation with WestConnex. They cancelled the only meetings that they agreed to before Christmas with Strata in the local apartments around the site. So residents have no knowledge whatsoever. Local businesses were door knocked before Christmas, and it seems that WestConnex is slowly providing information and leaking information before the draft plan comes out. We have had no such links, and therefore no opportunity to really get together with our local councils. The proposed site will excavate 8 lanes for this tunnel between Rozelle and St Peters. The very real threat is that because this triangle between Mallet Street, Piedmont Bridge Road and Parramatta Road is large, the very real threat to us and to residents here is that it will become a rat race when the site is developed further to allow a later exit. there's plenty of room there to reinvigorate the idea of an exit that goes to Broadway, to RPA, and to Sydney University. And I think that we ought to be aware and not remain optimistic and naive that WestConnex don't already think that they've won the battle there and will be able to just tuck it in later. So my request is that Council call on Sydney Motorway Corporation for information regarding this second tunnelling dive site proposal, that we investigate ways in which they plan to use that site, and perhaps follow the model that you have so well developed in working with Leichhardt against WestConnex and other local bodies. Thank you for your time.
Anybody else would like to, Darcy, come? And then the gentleman towards the back.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. I would like to reiterate the comments that have been made by a number of attendees tonight in support of the Council's policy position. I respect the fact that the Council has acted as an honest broker in this instance and made its interactions with the Sydney Motorway Corporation transparent and publicly available. I also appreciate that the Council has gone to lengths to have alternative engineering solutions investigated, and it's clear that the assessment, the independent assessment of the Council and the contractors that it's employed, is that neither of these sites, either the Darley Road site or Sydney Secondary College at Leichhardt campus, are appropriate for a construction site such as this. And that's not really any surprise to anyone who's actually familiar with the area. No one who lives anywhere near Darley Road or travels on it as an arterial road during peak hour would come to the conclusion that it's going to work having several hundred truck movements each week coming into and out of a new industrial construction site at that location, and it's just madness that anyone at Sydney Motorway Corporation came to the conclusion that putting a construction site next to a kids' playing field and a public high school, which is already chronically overcrowded, would be a good idea. I'm willing to consider the options in relation to Rozelle Goodyard, but I have to say, having read the report today, that I'm not convinced that it's our responsibility to come up with a solution to this for Sydney Motorway Corporation. It may be that because of the nature of the Goodyard, that the impact in terms of noise and dust and disturbance could be mitigated better there than other locations, but that doesn't avoid the problem of the truck movements. And of course, people who live adjacent to Rozelle Goodyard will already be dealing with construction. They're dealing with construction right now in relation to the tram stabling yards and other components of WestConnex. And so I think it's really important to look holistically at all of the impacts that might occur at that Rozelle Goodyard before the Council adopts a position one way or the other. The fact is that WestConnex is a $17 billion infrastructure project, and you would like to think that a government implementing such a project would take responsibility for having thought through all of these sorts of scenarios and problems before they started pumping funding into the project. And it really is incumbent upon Gladys Berejiklian and Stuart Ayres and Peter Jones from Sydney Motorway Corporation to find a way to make this work which doesn't have unacceptable amenity and traffic impacts on our local community. And I'd like to see the Council continue to work hard to achieve that objective.
Thank you. Yes.
John Lozano, resident of Haverfield. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, unelected administrator. I also would like to reiterate the comments that I have heard previously from other speakers. Both sites that are being proposed are absolutely ridiculous and should be discounted at every opportunity. If you are going to dig tunnels under the densely populated areas, there are some risks, and these are those risks. You need to find somewhere where you're not going to impact the residents above, and that's almost impossible. I agree that Haberfield has bore the brunt of this project, and extended construction at that area is unpalatable. I also disagree with the use of the rail yards. It has a rail corridor that can be used for public transport infrastructure in the future, and it should not be discounted for a motorway that would not serve the needs of the people of Sydney. WestConnex is a $17 billion project. The annual budget for road construction in Australia is $25 billion. 17 billion, one road, one city. This is a project that is set up for Transurban to ensure that they have tolls at every area of Sydney to ensure that their profits keep rolling in. Imagine if you charge Transurban a penalty for road congestion. They'd walk away from this project right away. But it doesn't matter whether you are congested on a road, you're already on it and you've paid your toll. It's just a glorified car park. One of the previous speakers also said that this project should have been audited. Well, it was. It was recently audited by the Auditor General, and it was found that concessional loans were pushed through by the federal government when Tony Abbott was in power to ensure the fast tracking of this project, to ensure it had a foothold, to ensure destruction commenced. So we can then say, well, we've demolished stuff, so let's get on with the project. The proposal of 2 sites is an old consultant's trick where they say, and you should know being a consultant yourself, where they say, would you like me to cut off your hand or your arm? Well, given those options, the hand is preferable. But I prefer not to cut off any appendage of my body. I prefer that you go back and you say that, as another speaker said, it is not our obligation to design your road. It is not our obligation to choose options. It is your problem to solve, and you must do so. Excuse me while I breathe. I lost my train of thought. Finally, I'd like to ensure that you don't oversimplify, an extension please. I'd like to ensure that you do not underestimate the resistance to this project by saying 50% of the people do not oppose it. I think it's much higher than that. And I also want to ensure you don't simplify our objections to this project, saying that it's just poor planning and if it was magically perfectly planned we'd be happy with it, is absolutely not true. This project is not there to serve the needs of the people of Sydney. It never was. And our objection is because public transport is what is required in the city of this amount of population, not another toll road. I'll leave you with this thought. What is the first thing your government asks you to do when there is a major event in your city? Leave the car at home. Take public transport. And they even make it free. Why? Because they well know that that is the most efficient way to move people around when they need to. So perhaps they should heed their own advice and not look to continue creating toll roads in Sydney. I thank you.
Further speakers on this item? No? Okay. So look, just a couple of comments, and thanks for the contribution there. Very much appreciated. But I will make a couple of points. In relation to Ted Cassidy's point about not imposing an extra 12 months construction on the Haberfield community, I'm very sympathetic to that point, which is why I think we do, despite the fact it isn't our road project, it's the state government's road project, but I do think we do have a responsibility to further examine the rail yards site, because our consultant put it forward as, if you like, the least worst option on the table, in order that we can at least look at whether we can provide some relief to the people in Haberfield who are right now bearing the brunt of this project. So I'm not saying that we're going to turn around and advocate that site to the state government. It depends on what our traffic and planners and others find out about the site, but I think we do owe it to have a further look at that site, as reflected in recommendation number 3. In relation to Leslie Treleaven's point about the Camperdown dive site, yes, it hasn't been one that's been particularly high profile with council, but we are aware of its existence, and I'm happy to add in a recommendation which is there now, which is calling on Sydney Motorway Corporation to immediately release information regarding the proposed Camperdown dive site and to conduct an immediate community consultation campaign, because I think it's not something, as Leslie made the point, that a lot of local residents are aware of. Certainly some of the businesses are, but I think it is incumbent on Sydney Motorway Corporation to also put up in relation to that proposal. So we'll add that into the council's resolution. Look, that's probably as much as I need to say. I very much appreciate the input tonight on that subject, and I will adopt. Look, one small change we've got. It's not 29 Derbyshire Street; it's 29 Derbyshire Road, which is something I picked up after we issued this today. So we'll just change that to get it right. 29 Derbyshire Road, Leichhardt, and with that change, with the addition of point 5, I will adopt that motion, and that becomes a resolution of council. So thank you very much, everyone. And we move on to, well, we don't actually move away from WestConnex, but item 1 in the council papers was a WestConnex update report, which has been considered previously by Council's Local Representation Advisory Committee, and they put forward 3 recommendations for council. We have got a number of people who wanted speak on that, some of whom spoke on the first item, so tell me if you don't want to also speak on this item, but I have got Catherine Gemmell first up, so Catherine's okay. I've also got Christina Valentine on. You're okay? And John Lozano. John, you okay? So we'll go to, and also Leslie. Okay. So I've got Frank Breen and then Chris Woods. Frank. Do they make sense? Sorry, disregard that, Frank.
Yeah, Frank Breen from Domain. My attention has been drawn to this matter once again because on Saturday night I was driving around White Bay on my way towards Annandale, and I noticed there was some large vehicles in James Craig Drive, and it came to my attention that they were there to clear any flooding that may occur when there's heavy rain. And so it seems that this is quite a frequent event around that part of the Roselle Goods Yards and the road that goes from the City West Link towards the Anzac Bridge. So it seems to me that there's, and besides what Alex Love said about what we learnt at the Flood Management Committee, I'm also a member of that committee, that it is a flood-prone area. And I note that Council's raised this in its submission to the REF recently, but I'd like to urge Council to do more about this, because it seems to me a fairly serious problem. On the one hand, we're trying to come up with ways of mitigating flood risks in flood-prone areas, and we've got a major infrastructure project being considered in one. We're talking about a dive spot just at the moment, but in the end, I believe that the exit and entrance to the WestConnex will be in that vicinity. And I note further in the report that we're getting some advice from senior council about this particular stage of the WestConnex, and that there was, and that senior council's advice was expected to be provided in February. Now it's the 28th of February, so I'm just wondering if we've got that advice and what the tenor of that advice might be. And just making a comment on that, I would suggest that Council seriously consider taking legal action, even if the advice is to the effect that the Council may not win in the end, because I've had a lot of experience with legal matters going right up to the High Court. I'm not a lawyer, but I know that nothing's a sure thing when it comes to a matter before the courts, and it's a matter of how you present your case. And so even though you may have what you may say a less than 50% chance of getting up, you may well get up anyway. So I'd like Council to seriously consider taking a more positive approach about the possibility of legal action. And also I'd be interested to find out if Council can do more about the concerns of the floodplain areas that we've been talking about this evening, particularly if there's some more information that's available from Council about his dealings with the WestConnex people regarding how they're going to deal with those floodplain matters. So I'd like to raise those two matters for consideration. Thanks.
Thank you, Frank. Chris Woods.
Mr Pearson, Frank Smith, a resident from St Peters, Church Street at St Peters, also registered to speak on...
Oh, no, I've got others, Chris. You're next, then Frank Smith, then John Stamoulis.
Yeah, I'd certainly like to hear from the residents before...
Oh, okay. Yeah, no problem. If Frank's here.
So
yep.
Frank's here.
Yep.
How you going? I'm an old bloke from St Peters. Been there in horse and buggy days. Yeah. Right. Look, since WestConnex started operating, I've had a few talks to them. The one main talk I asked them when they finish that, how they're going to get in and out of Campbell Street. Most days, our street, my church street, St Peter's Street, all the residents down there. All I got from them was, we'll work it out. No sort of, when they finish it, how are we going to get out? It's sort of look, don't worry about it, we'll fix it up. It's a bit too late after they'd finished it. And also, I've had trouble with cars coming around where they've closed off half the Campbell Street, and they can't turn left. So there's a little street, my street, where there's Victoria Street, where the White Horse Hotel is. They come round that way, think they're going to go down the Church Street and turn left. They've got the blinkers on halfway down. If they can't turn it, they've got to turn right and back onto the highway again, and there's no sign there. I've queried them a couple of times, but they did do nothing about it, And also, we've got people coming up at our streets, a dead end, up our end. We've got cars and trucks come up there, and at night time and daytime, I just had one about 2 hours ago. They come up there and swiped a woman's car. No worry, just took straight off. Don't worry about it. I've had my car hit 6 times. Now, it's getting too expensive to start repairing it all the time, and something's got to be done. I can't be, all the people in there. I had a truck yesterday, a van come up there yesterday. It sideswiped through the bloke's mirrors as they go down, bang, bang, bang. Didn't care, just kept going. And what I'm saying, they're using it as like a rat run, trying to think they can get in, but it's a dead end. They don't even look at, there's a big sign at the end of the street, don't look at that. So something's got to be done about it, I can't keep going on. I can't keep repairing my car. I'll be able to buy a new one by the time I finish. Yeah.
All right, well, is that it, Frank, or do you have anything else?
Oh, I've got a few things here, just...
Okay.
Sorry about that. I'm just an old bloke. Oh, yeah, you need a, with that street too, when they finish it, or when they do it, they need a review of the parking areas there in there, and, you know, because it's so narrow. When you park 2 cars each side, if they're not parked right on top, next to the, right on top of the gutter, you can't get through. It's that narrow. If you've got a 4-wheel drive, no way you get through. We even have the ambulances that come up there. They're complaining. They can't get through. And even even your garbage trucks can't get through. It's like a car park at sometimes at night time, you know. But as long as we can stop these people using a stick neck rat run, some people come up. Sorry, but some people come up the street, turn right, then turn onto the highway, think they can go straight across the highway, but there's a median strip in the middle. Can't do it. They've got to get back onto the highway again, you know. It's all a matter of signposting and a bit of common sense. But they're not. Westpac doesn't seem to have any common sense. they just treat people like non-entities. You know what I mean? Yeah. We can't have that. Sorry about that.
Good on you, Frank.
But I've been putting up this. I've been putting up this ever since I started.
Thanks, Frank. So, Chris, thank you very much. Chris, and then John Stamolis.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much, Frank. Frank's a long-term resident of St Peters, and the house that he lives in, the house that he was born in, and his mother before that, occupied the house as well. So it's a big story that Frank has to tell us about the impacts down there, and I thank him very, very much for coming and speaking with us tonight, and thank the meeting for allowing him to tell his story. I'm here tonight to speak about the recommendation, and as an ex-councillor on Marrickville Council, I'm Chris Woods. We had a bit of an opportunity to speak about this, and when this matter came to the LRAC, of course, it had a receiver note with it, and that was the only thing that it had on it. I think it's missing that receiver note tonight. I think we do need to add that to it, and to receive a note that there is a WestConnex report, and it's an update that includes updates on stages 1, stage 2 and stage 3. And I thank Council for the comprehensive nature of that report, and I particularly thank Council for the information that is gradually starting to flow now on what's happening with WestConnex. The reason why I chose to add the 3 items that you can see before you now is because they're specifically about St Peters. And that's not to detract from the destruction that's occurred over in Haberfield. It was with a great deal of sadness I watched what was happening over there in Haberfield, and I knew that chaos was going to be released soon over in our end of town down at St Peters. And certainly I wanted to highlight what has actually happened over the Christmas period down at St Peters. And I certainly wanted to refer to those 3 examples there. And the 3 examples that I talked about was the destruction of heritage houses. I don't think that people are aware that heritage listed houses have been destroyed and demolished down in St Peters, and I listed those. I felt that it was important that we know that the Bradfield Terrace, which is a state-listed heritage building, is gone. It was destroyed during the week. And that another very important heritage listing, which is the 82 Campbell Street Brickworkers Cottage, that was an important part of the history of Marrickville, was also treated in a similar fashion. I also wanted to acknowledge the terrible problems that residents were having. You heard from Frank tonight about the terrible problems he's having with vehicles in his street, trucks and all those sorts of things. And he's put in 4 requests for me. Yes, please. He's put in 4 requests, which I'm going to table in a minute, involving some signage that he's been approaching the Sydney Motorway Corporation, simple signage that he's been unable to get, and I'm certainly, I will table that. But I just want to briefly go over the history of the way that the Inner West Council and the way that Marrickville Council handled the whole thing that was happening in St Peters. You'd remember that in 2014, Melbourne Cup Day it was, residents were door-knocked by the Sydney Motorway Corporation telling them that their houses were going to be resumed and demolished for the widening of Campbell Street. We felt at the time in Marrickville Council that widening was totally unnecessary, and we still feel the same. So in other words, the whole project down there we feel was totally unnecessary. And we acknowledge that even in the context of the St Peters interchange. We were shocked that the proposal, which was originally a 6-lane proposal, was ever going to go ahead. Of course, it was downscaled 12 months later. It was downscaled to 4 lanes. Good. And we think that was, a slight concession. But we're most concerned that any proposals that we had about possible adaptive use of the heritage buildings and other arrangements that we had down there were simply ignored. And that's the basis of the third question that I've raised there. I think that it's an important issue that residents are not clear about, and that is what's happening to those important fig trees down the side of Simpson Park there, and I wanted that one attached to it as well. And residents need to know about that, although I do notice in your replies from the WestConnex Community Liaison Forum that there is an explanation there, and the Council's position seems to be that we've been assured that those figs are not being cut down. There are many other questions that local residents are no doubt going to ask us. There will be concerns about Camdenville Park and what's happening with the bottom end of Camdenville Park once the work finishes down on the Campbell Street widening. But certainly the major issue that really sticks in my mind is the heritage buildings that we've lost down there. And there's going to be a lot more losses in that area there. It seems that every day WestConnex has a bit of bad publicity. Our residents or our local residents in the Inner West have actually a disastrous day. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. John Stamolis.
Thank you. A challenge for council. I wonder if we can get an acoustic engineer for this room and set it up nicely for our future meetings, and also possibly wireless access while we're sitting there. Anyway, this report continues to show us the huge impacts of WestConnex, whether it be the cost, the loss of heritage, the disruption to inner city communities, and also to our local environment, the loss of trees. WestConnex is a $17 billion investment in car dependency and car reliance. With the population of Sydney set to grow by 1.5 million within the next 15 years, even this project is futile. That's the size of Adelaide and Hobart combined. It'll be futile because congestion will simply build and build. For $16.8 billion of public money, you'd expect a very long-term solution. This isn't it. We're not going to achieve that. Unlike good quality public transport systems which benefit local economies and also facilitate better planning outcomes, such as shops around train stations which benefit, around ferry destinations or major bus stops, big freeways just bypass all of this and offer nothing to our local communities, simply bypass, offering nothing other than to move cars and trucks about in ever-increasing numbers. It would be good if the Inner West Council pointed out more strongly that the most effective approach is to resolve transport issues into the future by changing behaviour in regard to car usage and car ownership, to rejuvenate local shopping villages and precincts, to encourage walking and traffic minimisation, and to create centres of employment that offer good jobs and incomes by building good, strong public transport systems to global benchmarks. Thank you.
Linda Kelly. And did anybody else want to speak on this item? Okay, so we've got Linda and then probably no one else.
Thank you, Mr Administrator. Linda Kelly, former councillor on Leichhardt Council. I've just got a quick question. It's in regards to the council traffic modelling study that was your administrator minute from the last council meeting held on 6 December. Last Friday, committee members were notified in a report that Council recently invited tenders for consultants to undertake this study. I'm making some inquiry about the status of that. I would suggest that there's a lot of people out there making a lot of money from WestConnex at the moment, and that an administrator minute from 6 December, I'm keen to know when did the call go out for tenders, and if we could keep an eye, if you could keep an eye and be accountable for this action, because it has some, it'll have some information that will assist us with the dive sites coming out. We've already had, 3 sites discussed here tonight, so I just don't think that we can move administrator minutes and then 2 to 3 months later put the tender out to action it.
On that point so nobody else wants to speak on this item? Just on that point made by Linda Kelly, my understanding is that we have been trying to get the final traffic modelling data out of RMS, and we've singly failed on that. So we're now actually going to have to spend probably more than we anticipated to do this piece of work. If we could have got the traffic modelling data to plug into our traffic analysis, it would have been a much smoother passage for us, but they have not put up the traffic modelling data. So we do actually need to do a bit more work now in order to derive relevant outcomes for those 3 parts of our local government area. So we worked during December and January to try to get that out of RMS. We thought we were going to get there. We haven't got there, so we've now gone with a broader scope in our study. I'm going to ask John Warburton for an update on timeframes with this, because we have certainly put out a request for tenders, but I'm not exactly sure of the details.
Yes, thank you, Mr Pearson. The tenders went out late last week, went out in the market. They'll be out in the market for 21 days. It is a difficult market to be out for road and traffic engineers at the moment. Unfortunately, a very large number of companies are obviously working for WestConnex and related projects. We still believe we will get a good response to the tender, but we haven't received any responses yet, but obviously it's pretty early. We wouldn't be expecting to have any update for at least 2 or 3 weeks. So the time frame is once we let the tender, so we'll have to go through a process of assessing the tender. That typically takes about a week, 2 weeks. We'll then start the tender process. It's really unlikely we'll have a report back until about June. So we're currently in March, so April, May, do the work. Hopefully, if all goes well, we'll have a report back in June, possibly for the June council meeting.
Thank you for that.
Question.
Yep.
I know this is a stupid question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. I'm sure you are going to discount anyone who's actually working on WestConnex or has any connections to them. Otherwise, it's going to be a flawed report, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Just making sure.
Thank you. Sorry, yes, Leslie.
Is there some way to include the Camperdown dive site, the 3rd dive site, in those
let me explain. So the work we're doing is not specific to the dive sites. This is about the 3 stages of WestConnex and examining what the rat running potentials are, which the government has said they'll look at that 12 months after they open the road. We're saying we'll do it now, because you need to anticipate and plan for these things, not wait till they happen and become a problem for local communities and then try and retrofit. You need to get on the front foot and do the work, which is what we're doing. So it's not dive site specific, but it does relate to each of the 3 stages of WestConnex. So it does relate to your area as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, John, I probably can't take, it's not a kind of question and answer session. I'll take one final question.
Could you explain how RMS, a government authority, cannot release information?
No, I can't explain that because we've been patiently trying to get it and we haven't been successful, John. So I agree.
They're not held accountable through the Freedom of Information Act or anything?
Well, we could GIPR it, and that would be a lengthy process. I think we've really now got to make the decision and move on with this work because it is very important. We can do it in parallel. We have been.
You should do that and then
we have been trying in parallel, but we can. Yes.
It would be good to compare your modelling against theirs.
It would. Yes, it would be good to have any modelling to compare. Thank you. Sorry, Ted.
Just one question.
Yes.
I understand from talking with my residents in Haberfield that representation to release feelers have been put out to people along the streets and along Parramatta Road, particularly Rogers Avenue in that area, to close off those streets. And I've had feedback from residents in relation to that. Are you aware of that?
No, not specific.
Your staff aware of that?
Well, I don't know, Ted. Let's talk about that separately and see what our staff know about it, but I'm not aware of it, no. Yeah. Okay. So, look, there was just a couple of further points. Frank Smith's issues are very much about the construction and compliance issues associated with WestConnex, which we do, after many months of pushing, have a single compliance officer dedicated to WestConnex, but we don't think it's enough. We, particularly as Stage 2 rolls out, we do think we need additional compliance resources. And we're pushing the Department of Planning for that. We've even offered to have council staff act as compliance officers on WestConnex, which so far they're reluctant to allow. But we definitely need more resources to address the kind of issues that Frank Smith raised. In terms of Frank's question about legal advice, no, we don't unfortunately have the legal advice. There's been some delays with Tim Robertson for personal reasons that we haven't been able to get that legal advice yet, but we are pursuing him hard for it, but we don't have it right now. And the flood risk issue was the issue that's dealt with on this agenda when we come to the flood management report, but yes, I agree, it's a very important issue. So I've made a side change to the recommendation, which, as Chris Wood has suggested, that council receives and notes the report, which we absolutely council does, and to specifically address those 3 points, which need renumbering. So it needs to be 1, 2, 3, 4, not 1, 2, 2, 3, and 4. And yes, my understanding in relation to point 4, Chris, is that we do have an undertaking from Sydney Motorway Corp that they are not going to touch those fig trees, and that's resulting in design variations in that location. So, that's a commitment they've given us. So we will certainly, ensure that is delivered. So I'll adopt those recommendations. And thank you very much, everybody, for your contribution. So we move now to item 2 of the business papers, which is the Marrickville Heritage LEP review. There are a number of people registered to speak on this item, and I've got Joseph Bell. Joseph Bell.
Thank you. My name's Joseph and I'm from Ashfield, but I am from a company called Mecone and represent our client, the landowners of a number of properties along Carrington Road in Marrickville. This precinct has been identified for urban renewal in council and state strategies, and the planning for this is ongoing in consultation with council. Number 30, Carrington Road, has recently come under the control of our client. However, this was not the case at the time of council's planning proposal being on exhibition. Therefore, it is not discussed in great detail in tonight's report, as we did not make a submission at the time. Since coming under the control in the last few weeks, our client has engaged a heritage consultant to undertake an independent review of number 30 Carrington Road, and this has been submitted to council officers, the relevant council officers today. And what this has shown is that the item is not worthy of a heritage listing, does not meet the criteria for local significance. And in summary, the item has not been associated with the predominant automotive industry along Carrington Road. It's visually separate from other items and is a relatively modest building that has been degraded by a number of additions. So we don't wish to delay Council's planning proposal process for the sake of one property. However, we would like to see tonight's resolution or recommendation amended to reflect the extra work that has been submitted to Council today and the extra work that needs to be undertaken by Council in reflection of number 30. We request that as the planning proposal progresses, this information that I've submitted today be assessed duly by council officers, and ultimately we would expect that the property can be removed from the planning proposal before being finalised and gazetted by the Department of Planning. Finally, we request that Council does give consideration when reviewing this item at number 30 Carrington Road to the public benefit of listing an item with questionable heritage significance. There is significant flooding issues in this precinct which are well known and have been well documented to Council. And this property will play a vital role in the ultimate engineering solution. The additional constraint of a heritage item which isn't really worthy of heritage significance will impact on the viability of urban renewal and any other public benefits which are being considered. Thank you.
So there's a few other speakers here. I've got Bruce Wolfe.
Thank you, Mr Administrator. My name is Bruce Wolfe. I'm speaking for Mr Peter Vulas on an objection to the heritage listing or proposal on the property at 294 Livingston Road, Marrickville. Just some brief background. Mr Vulas bought the house in 1972. He was a boilermaker. He worked very hard for the first 6 or 7 years on the house to repair and fix it. It was in very bad condition. He worked under the house, repairing wood blocks, clearing under the floor area. Inside, he's renovated the ceiling. He's repaired the roof, cleaned and washed the slate tiles. Outside, he painted and changed downpipes and gutters. He repaired the mortar and the brickwork on the outside of the house. He's repaired wooden windows. In short, he's maintained the house over the last 40 years without heritage listing. There are 3 main things I wish to say on behalf of Mr Vulas. Firstly, there's no imperative to list this property as a heritage item. Listing does not ensure preservation. In fact, all the evidence is that the house itself shows that without heritage listing, this property has met the criteria for listing as assessed by Council's independent heritage consultant. This is proof that the property doesn't require to be listed. The second thing is that although there's been some consultation, it's pretty clear from the Heritage Consultant's report, and in particular the page concerning this property, that if the property meets some of the criteria for heritage significance, then the recommendation simply is to list the property. But that's not the sole thing that should be considered, that is, whether or not it meets the test of the significance of heritage. There's no consideration for this particular property of the owner's interests and wishes. You could say, reading this page of the report, that those wishes and desires are to be ignored, and have been ignored, in fact. This is not the approach taken by the Heritage Council of New South Wales in listing items on the State Heritage Register. That's how it's worked in New South Wales for many years. I confirmed this today with an officer of the Heritage Council. The Heritage Council does not normally list a property if the owner objects, yet this recommendation basically ignores what this owner desires. What I'm asking you on behalf of Mr Vorlas is to exercise your discretion not to follow the recommendation to list, but to exclude the property from the heritage list and to recognise Mr Vorlas's good faith over many years, his hard work over many years, his maintenance of the property and the issues which he's raised, and that you don't, as in Mr Vorlas's words, he says he's very stressed with his council business, which affects his mental health. It's something that should be taken into account. There's no need to list his property.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Administrator.
Thank you. Van Nguyen? Yep.
Good evening. My name is Van Nguyen. I living in Tempe, and I would like to object the heritage listed proposal to my house, 149 Queen Street Road in Tempe. I received a letter from the council in August 2016 with 6 bullet points describe what is the heritage value of my house, and I write concern that that is not value, and the council organized a heritage consultant to come to discuss about that. And in the meeting, we discussed about the 6 bullet points from the council letter is built in 1890, and the heritage consultant told me that the house was advertised for sale in 1926 as new cottage. That's evidence the year of the house was built was incorrect. The house was known as Kelton Quarryman's Cottage. I asked that I cannot find this name when searched on Google. Where does this name come from? The council didn't answer. The house was first occupied and possibly built by quarryman Hugh Harrison, provide evidence of former quarry in the area. I asked that I can't find this person when searched on Google. Who is this person and does anything built by him? It should be heritage listed. Council didn't answer me on the meeting, say that they need to do more research. In the exhibition report, the council mentioned that the ownership of this person is not significant. The site provide evidence of early subdivision pattern. I asked that, is there any house in Australia is not subdivision? And what is the historical value or is considered it as significant? And in the meeting, I raised many concerns, and I cannot see any of my concerns addressed in this report that proposed to the council, where I can see that the community raised concern about cost, and it is look like it accepted that to pass the cost to the house owner. And I would like to request the council to address my concern that discussed with the heritage consultant that told me that come back to me, but didn't. First, maintenance of the house is costly, and what does the council think about that? When pushing the cost to the house owner, I'm working hard, raising 2 children, one 2 years old, one 6 years old. I'm not accepting for this cost. The rezoning is happening everywhere in the area, include the Bankstown and to Sydenham rezone. It will affect the area, include the Carrington Street, just 1 block away. And the heritage council, the house price.
You want 1 more minute?
Yes, please.
Yes.
And the house price will be decreased and affect my house if I sold the house. So I would like to request the council to investigate why and how my house was assessed by the heritage consultant. Secondly, I raise the concern, what is my owner's right to reject the proposal? If I say no, they say yes, and where we are going. And in here, it's probably past the cost to a house owner. I request that, with point Australian law, allow them to pass the cost to a house owner. And I would like to request this document to disclose all the concern of the house, the price, to be disclosed publicly for people to review. Because it is hiding all the concern. There's no detail of the people's concern in the document. And so last sentence. Yeah. And the document was released for us in few hundred pages. Give us 1 week to review and come here to talk. That is 2 sources. I have been working full weekend this weekend on the software release in a company, and I cannot spend time to read 300 pages in 1 week when I'm working full time. That's all, mate. Thank you.
Adam Siebes.
Mr. Pearson, good evening. My name's Adam Sivers. I'm a resident of Marrickville. Thanks for the opportunity to speak tonight. I'd like to speak in support of Inner West Council's decision to remove item 46 as an item of heritage value in the post-exhibition Marrickville Heritage Review report. The properties in question are 2 to 12 Warburton Street, Marrickville. I'm simply just going to read an extract of the cover letter that an independent heritage consultant's report I commissioned to submit to Council. The heritage consultant report was submitted in response to the Council's initial proposal to heritage list 2 to 12 Warburton Street and other properties, and I'm speaking on advice from that said heritage consultant. The conclusions of the report was that the Council's assessment and proposal is not detailed or thorough enough to justify a listing. Its assessment has not undertaken any interior assessments, which is crucial to a heritage assessment. Its assessment is partly based on a superficial exterior view only. It places an over-reliance on remnant facades. It overstates heritage significance as they've been substantially altered properties. Its assessment has not included a comparative contextual analysis of the surrounding area or buildings built in the same era. There has not been sufficient analysis of the interior. Its assessment has not measured accurately the level of integrity or intactness of the group, which has undergone 150 changes. Our comparative area streetscape survey shows there will be no loss of heritage to the area if this group was not listed. The report's assessment contains factual errors regarding polychrome brickwork and slate roofs, etc., and is therefore unreliable. It can't be formed as the basis of a sound heritage assessment. The overall recommendation is Council should not proceed to consent to the proposal because the group doesn't reach the threshold, group of houses that is, doesn't reach the threshold for listing using a standard heritage criteria. Thank you again for the opportunity.
Kevin Lamb.
My name's Kevin Lamb. I represent my uncle, Kwok Man Ma. He's the owner of 51 Frederick Street, St. Peter's, and I have enduring power of attorney for him. We completely object to a proposed heritage listing of our property. As mentioned in our initial submission, our intention has always been to redevelop the premises, and the listing will impose a major impact on our redevelopment plans. We have no intentions of selling the property. However, the upkeep and maintenance costs to preserve the building's exterior fabric will be so much more costly to us than our original plans, with little benefit, and we feel that we are being bullied, and this is extremely unfair and unjust to be subject to such a major imposition on our property and investment. We refer Council to the government-owned Sirius building in The Rocks, Sydney. Last year, the state government rejected a proposal to heritage list the site, despite the New South Wales Heritage Council's unanimous recommendation to proceed with a listing. The New South Wales Environment Minister cited financial reasons to justify their rejection. We feel like we are being bullied because we do not have the power of a government, yet our own objection to this heritage listing is discounted immediately when we cite financial reasons. This also applies to the properties of 28 to 44 and 82 Campbell Street, St Peters, which, despite having proposed heritage listings and having been assessed as having heritage significance, they are being removed from proposal to make way for the WestConnex. It seems like it's okay to overturn heritage listing proposals when it's convenient for the government, but not for us, not for when us little guys are concerned, and this is so unfair. Furthermore, there are already heritage listed shop-like dwellings in the direct vicinity of our premises, being 46 Frederick Street and 52 Sutherland Street. However, the shop at the corner of Unwin's Bridge Road and Frederick Street is not on the proposal to be listed. We don't see the need or justification for adding more properties for heritage listing if there are already a number in the area. It is a major financial burden on us as property owners who really are the major stakeholders on this subject, and we find it offensive that our concerns are dismissed the way that they have been during my on-site meeting and as indicated in the post-exhibition report. Our building in particular has major structural cracks over an inch wide across the corner of the facade and the entire length of the front section above the awning. These are not just cracks in rendering as your heritage consultant suggests. The awning itself requires rejuvenation to maintain its structural integrity. There are structural fractures along the entire height of the wall alongside Henry Street, and that wall is a massive eyesore which is regularly subject to graffiti vandalism. Extension, please. Yep. The property itself is already very run down and dilapidated with ongoing wear and tear, so why the need for us to preserve a 129-year-old building requiring constant and regular maintenance, a facade and sidewall with very questionable structural integrity, and so many major defects, all at great expense to us, fails to convince me. We urge Council to put yourselves in our shoes and imagine these heritage impositions being placed on your own property. Can you imagine being told that you're being restricted in what you can and cannot do to your own property? Or to benefit a minority of people who really have no real stake or vested interest in your property other than walking by along the street just to admire or appreciate the old look of your place? If heritage listing was so significant, then shouldn't we all be living in 19th century housing? Or even caves, for argument's sake? While a minority of people may appreciate it, I make no apologies for wanting to live in a modern world and modern dwelling where I don't need to worry about the front portion of my house caving in on me while I sleep at night, or imploding onto an unlucky pedestrian who happens to be walking by. It is so unfair and unjust and doesn't make sense that the landlord is slugged with all the impositions, restrictions, maintenance and expenses involved to appease this minority, and we urge Council to reconsider this listing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
James Cartwright.
Thank you, Mr Administrator. James Cartwright, Roads. I have a brief statement that I'd like to read, which should take less than 3 minutes. And with your permission, I've got 2 signed copies here for tabling for the meeting of Council. Mr Administrator, thank you for the opportunity to speak to the Council proposal that recommended the heritage listing of 389 Illawarra Road, Marrickville. I'm James Cartwright, the Secretary of the Churches of Christ Property Trust, the owner of the property. Standing on the property is a simple Protestant church building constructed of brick circa 1900, together with an attached flat-roofed modern structure. That modern structure has no heritage or other significance of any kind. Any heritage listing contemplated by Council should not include that flat-roofed structure. The listing of the whole of the brick church building as a heritage item is opposed for good reasons. Whilst that church building has served previous generations well, a contemporary building on the property is needed to serve and respond to the current needs of the local community. That is the only way of ensuring the Church of Christ can serve future generations of the community. The Heritage Act 1977 sets out 8 criteria for local heritage significance. The statement of significance prepared by Council in support of the proposed listing suggests only 3 of those criteria could possibly be satisfied: the historical, the aesthetic and the social. Mr Administrator, those criteria require consideration. The historical significance suggested is not related to the building itself, but rather to the presence of the congregation that previously met there. The aesthetic significance is described as one of a simple Protestant church, which is an example of Federation Gothic style. The brick church building is a very poor example of that genre and contains only minor elements of that genre. The social significance is identified as socially significant for its current congregation. That is, in fact, no longer the case. The historical evidence for the local presence of a Church of Christ is dependent upon that presence continuing, and that presence will only continue and flourish if an aesthetically appealing building meeting contemporary needs is constructed on the property. Therefore, the only criterion under the Heritage Act calling for any consideration is the aesthetic significance. The Trust considers that limited aesthetic significance can be maintained by restricting any heritage listing to the front facade of the church building only. The only means of ensuring some significance to attach to this property is to allow sympathetic, contemporary redevelopment of the property, which incorporates the front facade in the redevelopment. A good and well-known example of a redevelopment of that kind is Scott's Church in Margaret Street, Sydney. Mr Administrator, in the circumstances, the Trust urges Council, as per our original submission, to limit any heritage listing to the front facade of the church building in order to facilitate the redevelopment of the property in a manner which will benefit the local community and the new congregation to be established in the property. I thank you for your consideration of these matters. And I have 2 copies here that I'd like to table.
Yeah, no problem. Victor Macri.
Thank you, Chair, for giving me the opportunity to put forward the case of hardship being imposed on the pensioner with health issues that owns 294 Livingston Road. The proposed heritage listing of 294 Livingston Road will put the owner under increasing cost of living pressures, ranging from increased cost of repairs, even insurances. And I did actually explore this myself when I rang up the NRMA, and I asked them, if my house was heritage listed, would it have any effect on my premium? And the lovely young lady said, oh no, we still insure you. No, it'll be the same, under the same policy, that's fine. I said, that's great. Could you send me that out in writing, please? And she said, hang on, I'll just go talk to my supervisor. When she came back, the story was different. Well, you realise that the restrictions on heritage constructions and reconstructions and part damage are a lot more expensive to do than normal repairs on normal property. We would advise you, it's your duty of disclosure, to disclose your property has been heritage listed, and you would have to revalue your property and pay a higher insurance rate because it was more expensive to repair. Notwithstanding this, the Council has acknowledged this in its report, and on recommendation 7, Council considers options to provide financial support to owners of heritage properties, provide a report in the future. That's one of the recommendations. Well, I don't know. I wouldn't be comfortable with that, saying, you know, we'll look after you later, we're just going to list your property now. I think Council should actually get its house in order first, see what they can do, and maybe the offer of heritage might be more palatable for some if they know they're going to be assisted, particularly in the case of where a pensioner with health issues, and I've seen him nearly every day on Maryville Road come to me and virtually in a state, and mental issues is probably the least I want to say about it. There are controls already in the DCP that protect properties. We have the period dwelling controls, which protect period dwelling houses. We have streetscape controls, which also protect period homes. And one of the most frustrating things for me as a councillor on Maryville Council is we have to look at Council's own approach to heritage items, namely the 3 heritage listed properties on the Maryville Hospital site. One was a state significant house formerly owned and built by Fred Daly, the first Labor Party Treasurer of New South Wales. One would say that's very significant. The council, in its wisdom, applied to demolish these 3 houses. Then they engaged an independent consultant to assess this application. And I'll never forget the recommendation that came back. It's burned into my mind. It stated the application could not be properly assessed because it lacked the relevant information for it to be assessed. Therefore, recommended refusal. The Marrickville Labor and Greens councillors voted to demolish the 3 properties against the recommendation, which I found that quite shocking. Not to build a library or a park on the corner, but to build part of a 10-storey flat building on that portion of the site. For council to achieve the optimum commercial return on their property. How do we know this? Well, it's very simple. The cost of the library is 30 million. Can I get an extension? The cost of the library is 30 million. Council's return on that property, as it looks like, being 66 million. So that says a net profit of 36 million. So one could say the actual development could have been scaled back and covered the library and had a less intensive development. So what do residents most want to see out of their council in making decisions? Well, I think the first thing is for them to have confidence in what the council tells them they have to do. They should be actually following those things themselves. If heritage is so important, then they should be the first ones to do something about it, not to actually and go for the cash when it's on offer. The second thing, and that's where councillors are different to actual staff. There's compassion in decision making, which is sadly lacking in this case with 294. Taking into account the impacts of those decisions will have on the less fortunate in the community, I think that's why it's imperative for us to actually look at this, and we should be removing 294, and I've heard some good cases why others should be removed also. At the very least, council should actually put this on hold and review the items that have asked to be reviewed, at the very least, and actually work out what they're going to do if they want to heritage list these properties, how they're going to assist these people and not just throw them to the wolves. That's all I'll say. Thank you.
Do we have any other speakers on this item, Marrickville Heritage LEP? We don't, so I'm going to... Oh, sorry, we do. Sorry, we do have one further speaker. You could just state your name and location. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Peter Tambakeris. I'm the owner of 50 and 52 Warren Road in Marrickville. Bought the properties about 10 years ago, and was basically the plan was just to tidy them up and keep them as a steady flow of income for the family, and maybe someday redevelop the properties. A few years ago in the new LEP, it was the zoning was changed to high density, which was exciting, but I never intended on demolishing the buildings. I love the buildings as they are, and they offer a steady flow of income for our family. However, you know, I don't want to diminish any future value of those properties by listing them as heritage. Not to say that I have an issue with that. Warren Road has many beautiful Victorian buildings, which I admire very much, and I'd love to see them preserved. However, the 2 buildings that I own are not purpose-built Art Deco buildings. The facades were tacked on in the 1930s and I've converted into flats. They were originally 2 basic Victorian homes. So I was quite surprised when I got the letter from council saying they were considering listing it as a heritage item. I undertook a independent report from a heritage consultant, highly regarded heritage consultant, and it was the report was quite obvious in its final conclusion that the buildings have been modified several times. They've got several different periods. The facade is simply just Art Deco style, but it's not of any Art Deco significance, I guess you could say. So I met with the heritage consultants from council. They were kind enough to meet me on site. we went over the buildings, and they were quite surprised. They thought one of the buildings was purpose-built as an Art Deco building, and the other one was modified, but they agreed once they saw the old Victorian part of the building and then the 1970s extension, that they didn't have any heritage value. Well, I won't say no heritage value, but they shouldn't be listed. So I didn't plan on speaking today, but I noticed because I thought they made that recommendation to council that it be overturned, the proposal be overturned, but I've noticed that others have spoken who are in my position as well, so I just thought it would be, appropriate for me to speak. That's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter. Thanks. Anyone else on this item? I'm going to ask Jill Dawson to respond to the issues that have been raised.
Certainly. In relation to 30 Carrington Road, yes, we did receive that report late today. Our view is that we haven't yet assessed that report, and we're also aware that a planning proposal is likely to be lodged in the near future. So we will deal with, we will look at your planning report and look at it through that planning proposal, and let you know, rather than maybe hold this planning proposal up further at this stage, because it would take a bit of time to go through that assessment. In relation to which one was that? Sorry. To 294 Livingston Road. I do understand that there are concerns around that matter. I would say at this point, though, that usually in relation to the financial side of matters, that's not normally a matter that is considered in a heritage assessment. What we look at is whether there is any aesthetic significance, technical, whether there is also other matters such as its rarity, its representativeness, and matters like that. So normally financial matters are not a part of a heritage assessment, but obviously there are those concerns raised by owners, and that to some extent is one of the reasons we put in recommendation into this report, where now that we will be becoming a larger council area, it's an opportunity for us to review the matter of what assistance can we actually provide to owners of heritage listed properties, so that we can maybe help people in relation to that. In relation to 149 Winsbridge Road, it's a mixture of, I know it was raised that one of the advertisements when it was for sale was in the 1926. I think what you look at is that part of that property was built back in the 19th century, which is when you're looking at the sandstone, but then it has a later frontage which was probably built around the late Queen Anne sort of time. So it's a mix of age there. And also I note that you've, the notification, you felt that you didn't have quite enough time to review the report, and I think we take that on board. It is a large report, so whether that's something that we might look at when we make a decision on this report. In relation to 51 Frederick Street, I'm just aware here that it was at I believe there was a meeting with the owner at that point in relation to 51 Frederick Street, and that there has been an intention to redevelop that site. And again, I understand that where we're talking about an impost on the owner, and again, aware that to some extent that is true, and again, we want to look at what financial support we may be able to give clients in the future. In relation to if the house were severe structural issues, then that's something that if you were to put a DA in, even if it's a heritage listed property, then and you were asking for demolition, if it was on structural grounds, then that's a matter that could be assessed through a DA process. I guess in relation to the Church of Christ property, I know that there has been some discussion that they would just like to have the facade retained, whereas I believe our heritage advisor talked about not just the facade but the space within. But also it's a case that even if it's a heritage listing, adaptive reuse is something that is supported, and you can get some quite good outcomes of adaptive reuse of heritage buildings for many other uses. And in fact, sometimes a heritage listing actually allows a greater variety of uses that would otherwise be prohibited. So that's one matter. And I take on board what was said about the insurance, and again going back to what can council do to maybe help owners of properties. So those were, I guess, responding to some of those questions, but also understanding that maybe some people haven't had enough time to review everything as well.
Okay. Thank you, Jill. Look, accepting that point, I think that this LEP's been a long time in the making. I don't think it's going to be a problem if we take a bit longer to get it right, and I accept that some people may feel they haven't had adequate time, that they also are not comfortable with the outcome that's proposed. So we'll defer this matter tonight for further consideration. I suppose just to allay Mr. Sivers's issue, we're not going to be reviewing that. You're happy with that recommendation, but we will, on the other items that people have raised tonight, we will over the next month have a further consideration of some of those items. We may, I think it would be advisable that we have a further discussion with those people who've raised specific concerns and see if we can get somewhere before reconsidering it at the March Council meeting. I've got to be honest, it may result in the same outcome in March, but I do think we need to do this additional consultation. I do think also Council needs to consider what sort of financial assistance can be provided. This is often the most vexed issue with heritage conservation. I live in a heritage listed property myself and I have got no problem with it, but there are others who certainly do and are concerned about what the financial implications are often. So very reasonable concerns. We'll see what we can do to allay or address some of those concerns, but I will defer this tonight. So the recommendation, the amended resolution. Sorry, yes.
Could I kindly ask, with regards to my properties, if there's been a recommendation to council to remove any heritage?
I'm not sure of the status of your properties, but we'll look at that. The recommendation is to remove your properties from heritage.
What does that actually mean?
It means it won't be listed in the local environmental plan as heritage items. So we won't be revisiting that. We will follow through on not listing those items. Yep. So same comment as I made to Mr. Sivers applies to you. But the other people who made submissions tonight, we will over the next few weeks have some further discussions and we'll come back to the March Council meeting. So the matter's deferred tonight as per the recommendation which I adopt, and that's another resolution of council. So thank you very much everyone for participating. Sorry, I get Jill to talk to you. Jill, can you just go and talk to Jill? We need to keep moving. So I actually don't have any speakers for items 3, 4 and 5, which are, so we do have for, which item, Linda?
3.
3. Anyone else want to speak on item 3, which is the planning proposal for 168 Norton Street, Leichhardt?
Yes, please.
Darcy, so Linda and then Darcy.
Is the proponent not here?
I'm guessing not.
I might be watching live.
Possibly.
Linda Kelly, former councillor of Leichhardt Council. Thank you, Mr Chairman. I speak proud to have been part of the council that took the bold move to give a commitment to work with Uniting and consult community in order to establish a planning agreement applying to the site. It assists with the provision of a variety of affordable and supported housing for all ages, key workers and people living with a disability. Council explored options with our community regarding density bonuses that assisted our vulnerable to ageing place, and we were able to endorse the building envelopes for the site. And I want to acknowledge the work of the current and former officers and thank them for many hours of work, and there were many evenings involved in working with council and community on this. I understand this planning proposal is within the broad concept plan developed with council and community, and we are now looking at the more detailed stage where assessment on impacts of the amenity of residents can be made. I do urge Uniting to work with council on making the amendments prior to public exhibit of the proposal, and I hope that council can continue to be the planning authority for this site.
Thank you. Thanks, Linda. Darcy?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr Chair. I've just got a few questions in relation to the proposal. For the officers who weren't involved and the administrator who weren't involved in the previous consultation and planning process, it was very lengthy and detailed, and it actually involved the council stumping up funds for the community engagement and planning process. We spent, I would say, hundreds of thousands of dollars on it. And one thing that was absolutely clear in the memorandum of understanding that was adopted by the council was that the density bonus for the Harold Hawkins site, which we do want to see, which is we're considering tonight, which we do want to see redeveloped and is an eyesore, but it was absolutely inextricably linked to development of two other sites, including the site in Wetherell Street, the Luke and Care building, the church's home base, and also Annesley House, which is currently an aged care facility for people with intellectual disabilities. And it's not clear to me in either the officer's report or in the planning proposal that that link has been maintained. And so I'd like to ask what conditions are being applied, or what has been proposed by the proponent that would maintain that link and see the other sites developed with a community benefit as well. What conditions are being proposed by the council to protect that, and how those matters will be progressed from here.
Do you want to address that, Jill?
Certainly. Uniting are currently preparing planning proposals for the Marion Street site. So that one is likely, well, they've already had a pre-planning meeting with us, so that will be probably reported to council in the next 2 months.
Right.
So that one's moving on. And the Wetherell Street, that's a bit more complicated because of the heritage matters. So rather than delay the other two, that they're dealing with that one at a later stage. But they are, as we're going through with the early discussions in relation to the Marion Street property, is, you know, they are following through on the memorandum of understanding in relation to both of them. I'm anticipating it will be a similar matter for the Wetherell Street, but the heritage issues there are more complicated, so that they're taking longer.
Okay, thank you. That's very encouraging. But I might ask, is there a process for this, for the three to be considered concurrently? I'm not questioning the goodwill of Uniting Care, but the major concern of the councillors at the time, it wasn't unanimous, the support for the project. You'd be shocked to discover the Greens all voted against affordable housing. But everyone was concerned to make sure that we weren't just relying on verbal guarantees, and so it would seem to me that the best way to guarantee that we got those community benefits was for the matters to be either linked in their assessment or assessed concurrently. And so is there a process for that to occur? I'm just concerned if there's delays to the Annesley site. I mean, for instance, the Wetherall Street site is under the MOU is to increase the amount of student accommodation there from 20 units to 60. So if we lose that, the whole deal falls over in terms of the community benefit that was meant to be achieved. So is there a way for that to be policed?
Not at this stage. They are moving forward with separate planning proposals. We have to deal with those planning proposals as we receive them. We have 90 days under the revised sort of gateway process that the department's put in place. Otherwise, potentially, it could move to the department for that process. And any voluntary plan, because it will be through a voluntary planning agreement process, and that will be with each planning proposal.
Yeah. Well, can I just flag my intention to contact Uniting Care myself, and if you could please pass on my regards and let them know that I'm monitoring the situation closely as the person who initiated the process and had to conduct all the community consultation and bring the community on board. And I think it would have been polite of them to make contact with LRAC members prior to submitting the proposal, and I would appreciate a meeting and a discussion about how they're planning to uphold their end of the agreement. Alternatively, I'll go out and mobilise the community in a different direction. I'm sure that's not their intention, but I'm not satisfied with the protections that are currently in the proposal, and I'd like to see them reach out to myself and the other members of the community who supported their proposals previously.
Okay. Thank you. Anyone else? So, accepting those comments from Darcy, and I'm assuming that the MOU itself doesn't, Jill, enable us to have any control over the direction of those future planning proposals for the other sites, or did the MOU contemplate those kind of densities and
the planning proposals that they have put forward comply with each of the outcomes so far, both for the Marion Street and the Norton Street sites. What their proposals comply with the agreed outcomes of the MOU. So the only one we haven't seen yet is Wetherall Street, because the heritage considerations there are making that more of a complex site for them to try and plan.
Okay. So I'll adopt those recommendations, but we will also arrange a meeting or at least contact with Uniting and Darcy Byrne regarding the delivery of the three-site outcome. So thank you for that. Item 4, any speakers on that? That's an extension of the Annandale Conservation Area, which was considered by LRAC, which was supportive of it. No speakers. In that case, I'll adopt those recommendations. Item 5, which is an amendment to Marrickville LEP in relation to the B7 Business Park Zone. I have no listed speakers. Again, that was considered by LRAC, that was supportive of the recommendations. So if there's no speakers, I will adopt those recommendations. And that brings us to item 6, which is the Marrickville Golf Course Plan of Management. I've got several speakers. Starting with Mark Krupinski. Yep. Thanks, Mark.
Oh, that was me.
Yeah, that's all right.
Okay. Could I pass some, Mr. Administrator and fellow councillors, can I pass this around for you to have a look at some parts of our pond, the Dibble Street Avenue that we're talking about? Okay. My name is Mark Rapinski. I've been living at 35 Riverside Crescent for nearly 30 years and have the Dibble Street waterhole as part of my backyard. It's actually a wonderful place to be. When we first moved in, the pond was a stunning real oasis. Various types of bird life. We had 4 beautiful Peking ducks living on the ponds, plus a turtle that was full of water. and no duckweed. It was immaculate. We have seen many changes with the pond, some good, some bad. Marrickville Council in the 1990s organised a volunteer group that spent several weeks ripping out redundant vegetation and replacing with more suitable plants, of which the recent developers destroyed with chainsaws. Not very good. After the volunteer group had finished, all the local residents were invited to get together with the council at Cross Park, adjacent to the pond, to appreciate the work that had been accomplished and look at some future developments that they may do with the pond, which unfortunately didn't eventuate. For some time the pond was neglected by council. Cane grew in abundance, bushes got quite thick. Unfortunately, the drought hit. We got invaded with ibises. We had to deal with them due to a large number, that there were over 400. With the noise and smell they gave off, which was horrendous, you could smell all the way up Diddle Avenue. My wife and I then purchased a 10 million candlelight torch and used the dust to unsettle them by scanning through, which brought them up in the air. The Sydney Morning Herald actually came over and did an article with my wife about our plight with the ibises. It actually did get rid of a lot of the ibises at the time. When the duckweed became an issue, the council attempted in dragging it out of the pond, even tried to aerate the water to stop the duckweed on taking hold, but the duckweed would come back on sunny days. The council did a lot of good work for us at that time. We purchased a dinghy several years ago, so we could take the rubbish and broken branches off the pond to help clear it up. Thank you. The council assisted by taking away the rubbish which we stacked at the entry gate to the pond, so we are trying to maintain that pond. The pond has been at a low for several summers, but never as low as this year. During the recent downpour, I was home with my daughter and watched as the soil gave way from the Ewart side of the pond, from the cascading waterfalls of rushing water into the pond. Because the pond was so low, it caused a big cascading when we were watching it. The other thing was that it's typical that at that time the Riverside Crescent was flooded with a metre of water over the road and 4 cars were stranded, of which I spent most of the time outside trying to deflect cars from going in the water. My main concern lately is the golf course and its continual pumping from the pond during this dry season. I only back them to go if I can. All right. I believe once the pond reaches a certain low water level, the pond should be left alone to restore itself, supply from either rainfall or its natural spring. Also, the golf course has been used in the pond for over 70 years. They should be giving something back. Assistance in the maintenance of the pond, replacing the eyesore of what they're using currently, a long pipe with a large black plastic container at the end sitting in the middle of the pond. Maybe something more sympathetic to the pond would be nice. To finish off, I'd like to thank Marrickville Council's Biodiversity section for being very, very informative in assisting us with our questions about the pond and the previous work they've done on the sides of the pond with small retaining walls and clearing away a lot of the bushes and the cane. We hope that Council will listen and follow their instructions on getting the pond back to its full glory with the assistance of the Marrickville Golf Course. So our pumping is the main issue. If we can stop that, that would be the big answer.
All right, thank you.
Thanks for your time.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Mark. Got that. Justine Langford.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks everyone. Firstly, I want to congratulate the Council and the Council staff and Administrator on actually putting this report together. It's such a great relief finally that there is some action happening on this front. I've lived in the LGA of Marrickville since the 1990s. I'm very passionate about the environment and I'm very passionate about the area. I've seen a lot of change in the time that I've lived in the area, and generally I've found that the former Marrickville Council was highly effective in the area of the environment, but in the time since moving to Riverside Crescent and seeing the golf course lands and Dibble Waterhole, I was really shocked because basically the environmental policies that Council puts forward in terms of biodiversity there's a serious conflict there. And at the moment, the area is actually being destroyed in various ways, and council basically needs to keep up with what the changes in the area and what residents expect. There's a community petition, and almost 400 people have signed that, basically saying that they want the council to ensure that the area, our area, the area that we care about, is actually looked after, and we expect that. We want the biodiversity is really important, and we don't want chemicals being sprayed everywhere. We want best environmental practice. That area, the golf course lands, which is adjacent to the Cooks River, should really be the jewel in the crown of the inner west. You could look at it as a centennial park of the eastern suburbs. We have an increasing population, and a lot of the people probably using that golf club area aren't even from the local area. I'm not saying that there shouldn't be any golf, but I am saying that we need to rethink how the whole area is used. And I would just highly recommend that the report be approved, and that we have a plan of management for that area as soon as we can, and also that a new lease be put in place that actually looks after the interests of the environment. And currently, as Mark mentioned, the Dibble waterhole, the area is actually getting destroyed in various ways. So the plan of management, there was initially one put forward in 1999. It's now 18 years later. Why has council sat on it for 18 years? That's, I guess, my question. So I really look forward to hopefully that this plan of management will be put in place, and that the community can be engaged in that process. Thank you.
Thank you.
I do, James Gilronan. Yep.
Good evening, Administrator and Associates. As we all know, the population of the inner west is increasing, yet the amount of available green space is not increasing at a similar rate. The Marrickville Golf Course, as has been mentioned, represents one of the greatest opportunities that this council has to develop a large green space area that can be enjoyed by the whole community. I put it to the council that this plan of management is of a very high significance and should not be underestimated, so I support the prioritisation of a new plan of management. However, as we all know, this has been delayed for a long period of time, and in order for it to be done correctly, it seems like the whole community needs to be brought into the fold, and a lot of research needs to be done as to what the community would like to happen with this area. And in order for the community to be properly engaged, some information would be appreciated. In particular, information such as the amount of rent received from the Marrickville Golf Club for use of the land. And in addition to that, some kind of figure that can help people understand the basis for the alienation of that land, such as the number of people using it for golf purposes versus the number of people that use it for other purposes. This information hasn't been released, as far as I can tell. Looking into the 2012 matters, there were disputes, in fact, as to how many people use the land, and the whole matter has been pushed aside. I fear that if a new lease is considered, it could push back the matter even further. So I urge that those matters be perhaps answered now or in the soon in the future, and the whole community is addressed quite extensively in the preparation of the new plan management.
Thank you, James. We've got Chris Woods, if he's still here. He's gone. I don't think he is. Linda Kelly, and if anybody else wants to speak on this item?
I don't
Linda?
want to speak on this.
Okay. So, Peter, would you like to, Peter Gainsford, respond to either issues raised?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, in relation to councils, has had a long history in terms of the environmental requirements for the Dibble Street waterhole, and that will continue. We've had a bush regeneration contractor in there. The residents are probably aware that's continuing to do work in that area. Obviously, despite the issue that we've had in regard to the landslip the other week, and we're continuing to, we're going to work up look at the engineering solution associated with the water levels in the area, as well as the biodiversity requirements of the area and the future of that being a great bush care site for the Inner West Council. So we're in the process of just having a look at the technical side of those things, and as we develop that information will then feed into our plan of management process and ongoing community engagement in relation to the plan of management for that and the Marrickville Golf Course. In relation to the plan of management, we expect we'll engage a consultant to do this work, so there'll be a bit of a procurement time frame, but we expect to be engaging the community probably in the third quarter, the latter half of this year, by the time we procure the person, they start doing their research and engage the community. So we'll try and do that, and then we're bringing that back, doing that work now, and bringing that back to council probably early in the new year.
Thanks, Peter. Yes, Mark?
Just a quick question. The golf course, have they actually stopped pumping water now?
Not that I'm aware of at this stage, but we're working, not that I'm aware of. And we've got to look at the correlation. We're still trying to understand. A lot of people have given us some great insight into the history of the waterhole and the levels that there, but we're, from an engineering perspective, going to try and draw a correlation between the water levels. There's a basic assumption that people think that the water levels are low, it creates a risk. We'll be looking at that as part of our geotechnical investigation as well, and then to deal with that.
Because there are other parts of the waterhole that are already falling away since the landslide.
Yeah, we're monitoring that pretty much on a daily to weekly basis. We've had a geotech engineer out there every day, so we're aware of any changes and whether they're significant and pose a risk. The council's done a pretty good job of getting out there and addressing all of those risk issues, and we continue to monitor that.
You don't think it's due to the low level of water?
But we're still trying to get an understanding of that, and depending on the nature, and it depends on the slope of the embankment where the water is as well. So.
Okay, well, I'd like to thank everyone for their contribution there. It is obviously a very important issue for council, which is why we're accelerating this. I think on the normal time frame, this wouldn't have started until next year. But you know, both with the ecological and biodiversity issues, the management of scarce open space in the local government area, and the subsidence and other issues that we've had recently, combined with water quality issues, we obviously, you know, it's a no-brainer that we need to get this done as quickly as possible, but we do need to take the community with us on it. It's not something we can just do behind closed doors. We need to talk to the community as well as the golf course, and try to work our way through this as quickly as possible. So Peter's addressed the time frame, and thank everybody, and I adopt that recommendation so we get underway with that plan of management from now. So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. That takes us to item 7, which is the minutes of the recent Implementation Advisory Group and Local Advisory Committee meeting. So I did have John Dermolis to speak on this.
Yes, I'm pleased to see that Council is going to take action to inform our residents about the local election coming up in about 6 months' time. it's good that, that there's a focus there, and it'd be nice to also provide some basic documentation for potential candidates as well. But I'm also concerned very much that the issue of representation hasn't been addressed. What I mean here is that mergers have slashed the numbers of councillors across Sydney at a time when Sydney is set to grow by 1.5 million people over the next 15 years. The impact of that's going to mean that the average size of councils will increase by 60,000 people over that time, the average size of councils. We also note that the Premier has created a two-tier system in the last week, where the Premier's left rural councils with representation of one councillor per 900 people, while forcing through one councillor per 16,500 people on city councils. One councillor per 900 to one councillor per 16,500. Very much a two-tier system. For the Inner West, our representation will plummet from the current one councillor per 5,100 to one councillor per 12,300. Now, I've mentioned, and you've heard me mention before too, that in London, one councillor represents on average 4,500 people, which was what we had pretty well. We had 5,100. But London has about 50 to 70 councillors per council, while Sydney councils have arbitrarily been capped at 15. 50 to 70 in London, 15 here. So therefore, in London, our Inner West Council would have about 60 councillors. Now, of course, London doesn't have state governments, but who would suggest that they gain an extra 45 councillors per council because they don't have a state level? An extra 45. I'm not suggesting that Sydney Council should have 60 councillors, but London is one of the top 2 global cities, yet it has more councils than Sydney does, and much, much higher representation than us. And then you look at Canterbury, Bankstown and Blacktown, both have 350,000 people each, again capped at 15 councillors. The worst local representation in Australia and possibly in the developed world occurs in our adjoining, one of our adjoining municipalities. Anyone would have expected that reform of local government should have made representation fairer across councils. Now it's much worse. I believe that state government must lift the cap on councillors by a sensible amount. We already have 2 levels of government, federal and state, which have minimal contact with the people. Most people feel increasingly irrelevant when it comes to influencing or interacting with federal and state government. Is it too much to ask that we have meaningful access to one level of government in Australia? After all, we spend enough money on 3 levels of government in Australia that I believe it's time to focus on a better representation. If I could finish with a potential amendment. Council to contact the Minister to seek reasons why there is such a low representation across Sydney, both in terms of national, international, rural versus Sydney basis. Those 3. And to request that there is an increase of representation for Sydney councils and specifically for the Inner West Council. Thank you.
Does anybody else want to speak on this item? John, I understand your point, and I know you're making the point forcefully. I've seen it. I've seen you in various newspaper articles and otherwise, but I don't think it's appropriate for Inner West Council to formally make that amendment. I accept the point you're making, but particularly in relation, and we are doing what we, as efficiently as we can, the election planning in 6 months' time, as you've stated. And we can't change the number of councillors. There will be 15. There will be 5 wards. There will be 3 in each ward. That's the playing cards that we're being dealt, and that's what Inner West Council is working with. So I understand your points, well made, but I'm not going to amend the recommendation. I'm going to adopt the minutes of the 2 meetings and note the contents of those minutes. So thanks very much. We move to item 8, which is the Local Traffic Committee meeting of the 1st of December and the 2nd of February. And I do actually have a number of pre-listed speakers here, Alex. Well, so I've got Matthew Bogdanovich. Matthew here? No. I've got John Cayley.
Yep.
Yep.
Good evening, Richard and councillors, not councillors, but council officers and public. My name is John Cayley. I'm the president of Bike Marrickville, so representing people who ride bikes in the Marrickville LGA. And I'm just wanting to speak in support of the proposed local route cycleways on Livingston Road from Dulwich Station to Marrickville Station, and also from Lewisham to Newtown. So I've got 3 kids, and I'm sure lots of people have got kids, and you know that once your kid turns 12, they're not allowed to ride on the footpath anymore. The streets is where you have to ride your bikes in New South Wales. And so your 12-year-old's going on there, and as people have been saying, Sydney's growing, another 1.5 million people, and we've also heard a lot about the traffic. We know how congested it is, and a place like Livingston Road, I think the report says something like 10,000 vehicles a day. And it's just not a place where kids are comfortable riding, a lot of adults aren't comfortable riding there, and yet Council in its strategic plans in 2013 identified making the then Marrickville LGA a place that people can move around, personal mobility, a place where people can have active transport, where they can gain some fitness, and it also identifies that Council needs to have some strong leadership in this area. So creating good cycle paths is one way that we can do this. And great cities around the world have started doing this in a big way, and Marrickville has got very few good cycling facilities at this stage, but it's good to see Council moving in this direction, and I applaud the efforts of Benny here in proposing these routes. And there have been concessions made in terms of parking, and that's a shame. I think that at the moment we still prioritise car parking on the streets over the mobility for some of the less well-off in our community and the young. So yes, in support of these cycle routes, and also note that we've made some recommendations about improving them, and that where possible the routes can be made wider, and as little conflict with pedestrians through keeping it on the street where possible. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Justin Hillis.
Good evening, Chairperson. My name is Justin Hillis, and I'm a resident of Marrickville and a keen cyclist. I live on Beecham Street, which is a cross street to Livingston Road, and as such, I find myself utilising Livingston Road for bicycle commuting and recreation on a regular basis. Perhaps not surprisingly, I am in support of the Livingston Road cycle path. My support stems primarily from the benefits this cycle path will provide in regards to safety. I also support making the Inner West more bike-friendly, as well as providing additional parking spots for nearby residents. Although I acknowledge that any support based on individual experience is largely anecdotal, I'd like to proffer my opinion on the safety benefits of the proposal. Specifically, I wish to advise that on a 100-kilometre round trip of metropolitan Sydney, incorporating roads both north and south of the Harbour Bridge and as far west as Parramatta, Livingston Road continues to be one of the more dangerous suburban roads I ride my bike on. The poor road surface, the abundance of side streets and parked cars, as well as merging lanes, all combine to result in a truly uncomfortable and unsafe road to ride on. In speaking with friends within the cycling community, Livingston Road is often avoided for these reasons. I'm sure Council is aware that improving cycling infrastructure generally results in an enormous increase in bicycle use and uptake. I have no doubt that incorporating a bicycle path into Livingston Road will result in similar benefits. I also hold out hope that this cycle path will at some stage link to Addison Road in a safe and effective manner. I understand that the proposal has been modified to suit the individual needs of those who utilise Livingston Road to park their vehicles. Although the current proposal is less than ideal, I applaud Council for seeking an effective compromise and would urge Council to continue to show strong and visionary leadership in providing green, safe and effective infrastructure for the area. With increasing urban density, the number of inner west residents that will rely on bicycle infrastructure will increase dramatically. Although this cycle path is just a small piece of the puzzle, it will provide an important link between well-travelled parts of Marrickville and will go a long way to future-proofing the inner west. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Justin. I've got James Gilronan and Alex Locks. James, did you want to talk on this?
Hi there. I didn't actually put my name down for this matter, but I will definitely say that I support the construction of cycleways, and I also endorse the investigation of perhaps a review of the cycle route maps that are presented to the citizens of the Inner West. I've seen the maps released showing the regional routes, and a lot of them do direct people through unsafe roads such as Livingston Road. There are many other roads that cyclists can use, and before we do create this new cycle network of separated cycleways, I think that a lot of work can be done and discussed by the committee regarding other roads and how we can help cyclists, especially new cyclists, to use those other roads and to avoid risks in the meantime before those separated cycleways are developed. Thanks.
Thanks, James. Alex?
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. This is actually business arising, I would classify it as. I've received an email trail from a Miss O'Loughlin who lives on the corner of Edward Street and Smith Street. Council is proposing to build a roundabout, and I understand why. I don't know Ms. McLaughlin personally. I would have got to speak to her in my advocacy for residents regarding the mill development and the Lewisham Towers development, hence the need for a roundabout in Council's view because of the increased traffic. However, the proposed treatment required is that there be a large metal barrier built around outside Ms. O'Loughlin's house, and I'm simply urging through you, Mr. Administrator, to Mr. Gainford and Mr. Petchler to ensure that Ms. O'Loughlin is invited to the next traffic committee, which I think is on the 2nd, and this matter will be considered. I think the council officers have done a good job of communication, but there seems to be a rising level of frustration in the emails, and it could be possible to come up with a more sympathetic treatment than a large metal barrier to protect the house, such as has been done in Booth Street, Annandale and so forth. So I would just urge that the matter be considered with her present if that's possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Alex.
I have the, do you want me to table this or?
No, did you want to provide it to traffic? Yeah. We'll respond to the, we've got one more speaker, and then we'll respond to the issues raised.
Rennie Holmes, Ashfield. Before I start, the podcast didn't come on till 2 hours into the
Yes, I believe we had some technical problems, unfortunately, Renee.
I wasn't coming up, but since Alex Lofton's spoken about a roundabout, I requested on the 30th of October a meeting about the roundabout at Church Street and Croydon Road, and I still haven't heard anything. I requested a review and I gave information to Phil Sarin. I know he's left, but I'm wondering what's happening with that meeting and have engineers been engaged on that.
Okay, my recollection was that we were going to get an independent engineering evaluation of whether you could actually feasibly fit a roundabout into that location. So I'll ask Wal to respond to that. Was that the...
In 2002, council's engineers drew up a diagram for a roundabout. What has changed since 2002 till now?
Thanks, Renee. I will ask Wal to respond to that and the various other issues that have been raised. So over to you, Wal.
With the last item about the roundabout, yes, look, the direction was that we were to engage an independent assessor to examine the feasibility of the roundabout. That's still on the books to do. It hasn't started yet.
It's 15 years.
But the project's not budgeted for at the moment, so the priority's been delivering work that
15 years tomorrow since the traffic committee.
So it is on the books to do, and we'll program that probably the last quarter of the financial year. Issues with the cycleways. The comments made by Blake Marrickville, we'll take those issues, the submission you made, we'll take those issues into account as we prepare the detailed design, which is the next stage of the project. Review of the cycle routes maps. I'm happy to take that on board and consider that issue. We'll make contact with the resident Edward and Smith Street in terms of making sure her views are heard on that issue at the traffic committee.
Okay, thank you.
It is 15 years tomorrow since it was approved.
And thanks, Renee. In terms of the cycleway projects, we have obviously had to make some adaptations based on many submissions about loss of on-street parking, and I do want to thank Ben and Wal and the team for taking this from the position it was some months ago, where there was, armed insurrection in Livingston Road, to a position now where I think we have a compromise, which may not be everything the cyclists want, but it's certainly better than the current situation today that cyclists face on Livingston Road. So I do thank Ben and Wal for navigating our way through this complex proposal, and receiving and noting the minutes of those two traffic committees, we essentially move forward with those cycleway projects, and thank you. And Renee, we will get back to, I'm happy to arrange a meeting about your roundabout, but that roundabout, but we have got it on the program to look at the feasibility, but I'm happy to arrange a meeting about it as well. So thank you. Thank you. And Alex, I'm not sure, did Wal address your issue?
Yes, he did.
Okay.
Excuse me, Richard, does that mean that what happens in regards to the cycleway projects now? Is there a determination that you are proceeding with them? Wal?
Yes, if the recommendation is adopted, the next step is to proceed to detailed design, which we have to have well advanced by the end of the financial year with a view to looking at construction, depending on budget allocations over the next year.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the recommendation up there. I'm not seeing a recommendation.
It's contained within the minutes of the traffic committee, so it's not that obvious, but in adopting those minutes, the actions specified in those minutes now occur, which is to deliver in your case, to deliver those cycleway projects. So,
okay.
Yeah, but I'm sure that the team will have further discussions as they do the detailed design work.
Yes, the detailed designs will be coming back to the traffic committee again.
Yeah. Okay, but it's often running, John. So, okay, or often cycling.
Okay, thanks.
All right, thank you. Thanks, everyone. So, item 9, addressing domestic and family violence in the Inner West. I have Linda and John Stamalis listed to speak for this.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Linda Kelly, former councillor on Leichhardt Council. Next week is International Women's Day, and the theme for International Women's Day last year was gender equality, where former Australian of the Year Rosie Batty called for a greater gender equality in Australian workplaces, arguing that the root cause of domestic violence is inequality. The former Leichhardt Council was one of the largest employers in our local area, and we had just over 50% of the staff as women. As Mayor and Deputy Mayor, Darcy and I firmly believe that the public sector and government should be a good model of best practice. And steadily throughout the term, we together implemented some positive change, such as paid and family domestic leave entitlements and supportive policy for our staff, as we all know that secure and safe employment is fundamental in supporting women experiencing violence at home. Council took action to prevent domestic and family violence with our Speak Out program, and last year at the AGM of the Leichhardt Women's Community Health Centre, I was amazed to hear, and so was many people present, that they attribute their 58% increase in women presenting for assistance with family and domestic violence to our Speak Out program that we ran out of Leichhardt Council. Recently, the Leichhardt Area Command also told me that responding to family and domestic violence is the main reason for their calls for assistance in the former Leichhardt LGA. Council also funded Love Bites training to deliver education on respectful relationships to the Balmain and Leichhardt campuses of Sydney Secondary College. And the Women in Leichhardt Leadership Program, initiated by myself, was last year awarded the Local Government New South Wales Excellence in Diversity Award. We achieved sustainability for our annual International Women's Day event, so we can host it again. The Council can host it again next week in the beautiful Pioneer Park. We also doubled the budget for that event, and with the Women's Business Breakfast, we ensured that they had a line in the budget like Big Bike Day, and that these events would be sustainable into the future. For the last 3 years, a strong contingent of council representatives, staff and councillors have attended the New South Wales Australian Local Government Women's Association conferences and local government conferences, and I'm unsure who's been making such representation during this council administration. For our senior staff, we initiated equal opportunities in higher grade duties, leave relief, and as a consequence, we had our first acting female general manager. With 5 men employed at the helm at the moment of the council, I'm not confident when that will happen again. The 2016-17 budget included allocation for our first ever women's officer position, which sadly has not yet been recruited. We certainly did take on gender equality in the workplace and in our community, and we implemented within council and community great positive change in a very short period of time. However, the facts for Australia are very real and sobering. The 19% disparity of gender pay gap contributes to women's inability to obtain a home loan or save a deposit for a home. 1 woman a week in Australia is killed by her partner or someone known to her. Domestic violence is the main cause of homelessness for women and children in Australia. And diversity of women in the workplace is not currently representative of our communities. And women retire with 1/3 less superannuation than their male counterparts. Finally, I want to acknowledge the partnerships like the Inner West Council has developed to address family and domestic violence to facilitate a safe community for all. I'd also like to comment that previously on Leichhardt Council, we'd allocated from, if my memory serves me correctly, 2 lots of $10,000 in 1 year, $20,000 for the Speak Out campaign. And I urge Council to defer this matter until next month and bring back more detailed report on the allocation of $10,000 alone to the Speak Out campaign and how that is going to be spent. Some of the suggestions in the 1 paragraph in the report around this, we haven't been able to afford to do with $20,000. I'd like to see a report that includes what's happened specifically to this point for the Speak Out campaign, and then what are the potentials with the budget of $10,000, and also the potentials that can be achieved with the budget of $20,000, given that Leichhardt Women's Community Health Centre has had a 58% increase in women presenting, seeking assistance for family and domestic violence issues, and they attribute that rise to our Speak Out campaign in Leichhardt Council. Thank you.
Thank you. John Stamolis.
First of all, I'd like to open up by thanking former Councillor Linda Kelly for a well-researched and well-presented discussion to our council just then. In terms of my presentation, I'd just like to say that a day after reading this report, I read two stories in the Sydney Morning Herald which related to youth behaviours and attitudes which may well have parallels with future domestic violence. One was in relation to an alarming number of assaults at university campuses, and the other article informed us from survey data that a significant proportion of young people accept that violence is excusable if intoxication is involved, that women can be disrespected on the basis of what they wear, while the majority of women still feel that they cannot leave a violent relationship. All of these coming from our youth were very disconcerting. I'm confident that our community-based programs are very effective and have the highest of expertise, but I'm sure that this is an evolving field of research with new approaches and research being undertaken on an ongoing basis. I would like the Inner West Council to investigate how we can tap into the expert knowledge out there, to the survey research that is developing all the time, and to see whether or not it would be of use for us to lead the way by running forums involving our domestic violence groups, our respectful relationship groups, and our youth groups in our municipality, along with council representatives who are involved in these key issues. I'd like to see whether or not we could investigate whether it would be possible to run such a forum or activities that would tap into the building knowledge in this area and the survey research. Thank you.
Did anybody else? Yes, Darcy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to speak to the recommendation. I'm aware that the NatCan report, which we initiated prior to the amalgamation, is essentially complete and is due to be reported to, handed into council, well, I think by the end of February. Today's the last day in February. It was designed to be a blueprint, if you like, for how we could vastly expand council's involvement in all community education of children and young people, with the objective of creating a generation of young people in the Inner West who would significantly reduce the incidence of disrespectful behaviour towards women and children, but also violence and abuse. Now, I expect that to be a very detailed report. It's been informed by an enormous community consultation funded by council previously at the cost of $25,000, and I don't feel comfortable with the budget allocation for the breadth of this program being determined tonight prior to receiving the report. I concur with Linda Kelly's concern that it's actually a net cut to the a net halving of the funding for the Speak Out program, despite the fact that it now appears to be designed to be able to send out a message to the entirety of the Inner West Council area as opposed to the former Leichhardt Council area. So we put $20,000 into it. There's $10,000 recommended in the budget. Given that Leichhardt Women's Community Health Centre have reported that 58% increase in the reporting of incidents, which they attribute to the Speak Out program, and the fact that they actually service the entirety of the Inner West Council area, I'm not satisfied with that. I would prefer that that be revisited. I'm happy to campaign against the decision to halve the budget for an area 3 times the size, but I prefer council to defer the decision tonight and come back and take another look at it in a month's time when the report from NatCan has actually been received. In addition to that, the $25,000 which is allocated for the implementation of the recommendations in the NatCan report, firstly that does seem to be a figure that's been plucked out of the air. Secondly, I think it grossly underestimates the funding that will need to be made available in order to implement the program. I would presume that the recommendation in the report will be that there be a recurrent budget allocation for this endeavour, unless we think that we're going to solve domestic and family violence in 12 months, which seems unlikely. So I think the investment is insubstantial and unacceptable, but what I would prefer, rather than condemning it right now, is that we all wait to receive the very detailed report, which Council may already be in possession of, but which hasn't been tabled at this meeting, but I'm assured will be available publicly in the near future. Let's look at what the recommendations are, understand the research, the consultation that's taken place across the Inner West, and then decide what the budget allocation might be and commit ourselves to making the program work. So I'd like to request that the Administrator would amend the recommendation along those lines.
Thank you. So, anyone else on this item? So we will defer it for further consideration of the funding levels. So what you need to do, sorry, talking to the start. Okay, so that's the amended recommendation. I hear what Linda and Darcy are saying. We'll have some further discussions and we'll come back.
And when will that be reported back?
Well, I'm saying to the March council meeting, but it may actually be that something that we can talk about at IAG and or LRAC prior to the March council meeting. So I'll adopt that recommendation. And item 10, which is operational plan update. I don't have any listed speakers for that. No speakers for item 10, operational plan. So I receive and note that report. Item 11, which is the Flood Management Advisory Committee. I have Frank Breen.
Thank you. Yes, I'm continuing to focus on flood issues, and I note that from the Flood Committee meeting that there was a resolution that the Administrator write to the relevant ministers about the problems associated with the St Peters Sydenham area that Alex Lofts referred to earlier this evening, where we have Sydney Metro and the Sydney Motor Corporation competing with Sydney Water for Sydney Water's installations at the moment, flood installations, and linking it to the point I made earlier about the Roselle goods yards being a flood-prone area. So I'm keen to hear that the letter's already gone off to the ministers, and be keen to hear what the feedback is. But once again, I'd like to emphasise that that I'd prefer to see council. I would like to see council making a bigger issue of this flooding matter when it comes to WestConnex, and making it a factor that is not just swept under the carpet by the WestConnex. It's not just a throwaway engineering solution, but something that we get some real answers for. So, firstly, have we sent the letter off to the ministers, the relevant letter, and if there's a reply, I appreciate information about that. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Frank. Anybody else on the flood committee? No? Walt?
Administrator, the letters are ready for your signature to go as soon as you resolve this resolution.
Okay.
But in the interim, we have had a meeting with the relevant parties, from including WestConnex. They did give us an assurance that they were going to consider the proposal we put forward, that Sydney Water and Council were pressing for. But we're waiting to hear back from them. I guess that won't be for a few weeks.
Okay, well, thanks, and I'll adopt the recommendation. I'll sign the letter of support with. Thank you. So tomorrow, yeah, okay. Brings us to item 12, which is review of planning proposal fees and charges. I've got John Stamollis.
Thank you. I note the significant variations across the councils in the pricing data provided in the report. While the final pricing achieved for the Inner West Council appears to show some significant increases for some councils. I appreciate the difficulties that are always there when you try and standardise such data, but there appear to be some significant variability. So therefore I'm just asking a quick question about the model used and what outcomes council would hope to achieve here, and did you achieve it or didn't you? Thank you.
Thanks, John. I think it's Jill.
Certainly. Planning proposal fees, they're not regulated in any form. So what we did was we actually undertook a survey of numerous councils around the metropolitan area. In particular, we were looking at councils that had similar variety of planning proposals in terms of ranging right the way up to very complex planning proposals. And as you can see, if it's quite a simple planning proposal, then the total cost is only around the $12,000 for the first and second stage. But when we're getting up to the more complex ones, that's where it actually does require a lot of work. For example, I think our total for the most complex, we're saying $90,000 all up. Whereas if we take the City of Sydney, they range up to about 126,000, and Parramatta around the 93,000. So I guess we've got a range of fees that we're proposing, and it was just based on looking at what other councils do charge.
Thank you, Jill. Thank you, Jill. So what am I doing here? Yep. So I got that recommendation, those two recommendations, and we'll exhibit the proposed fees and charges with a view to commencing them in financial year 17-18. No.
We were looking to place these on public exhibition now, so that once the exhibition period had been undertaken and we'd reported back to council, they could actually come into effect immediately. Okay, and in particular, we have a large number of planning proposals in the pipeline.
Okay, that's even better.
We need to cover costs.
Okay, thanks, Jill. Thank you, Jill. So we now have the quarterly budget review. So the period ended 30 September, which is item 13. There is also one for period ended 31st December, which is item 16. It makes sense to consider them at least sequentially. So we can do that. I've got Mark Drury, Frank Breen and John Stamollis to speak on these matters. Mark, did you want to open the batting?
Thank you, Rich. Oh, whoopee cushion. Nice gag. I'd like to indicate that this is a far better report than we received on the 6th of December. It actually gives a clearer picture of where the council is financially. It explains the major variations and indicates where the money should go and what should happen to it. So, and in terms of the budget adjustments that are being suggested, I have no quibble with any of those. and I congratulate those who've worked on this to get it to a standard that it is. Just turning to the item 16, I believe you're dealing with them concurrently, if I heard it correctly. And I suppose this goes to the question of the capital expenditure, and something that is quite dear to my heart. One of the questions I have is a little bit of a what I don't understand on page 11 or 1,389 is a reason in relation to capital budget adjustments, which says detailed capital expenditure review has been performed by the group managers. Got that. It was decided to make budget adjustments in the second quarter with a view to complete the projects by the 30th of June this year without carrying over the unspent money into the next financial year. Am I to understand that those projects, and I'm looking particularly at ones that came from the old Ashfield, so things like the Summerhill Car Park, North Street Review, work on the Bowling Club, Richard Merton Reserve, blah, blah, blah. Am I to understand that those projects are to be completed by the 30th of June? And there will be no carryover? Because I don't think that's possible. That's not going to happen. So money is going to need to be carried over for those projects because they will not be completed by that time. So I think it may be just the way that the explanation is phrased. I'd like to hear what exactly is being proposed in relation to that. The other point, and indulge me if I may, is that what I think the previous Ashfield Council struggled with, and it seems to me that we are still struggling with in the Inner West Council, is that we put money aside for capital projects, but we can't deliver them in the financial years that we wish to. Now, part of that is the appetite of elected officials to promise stuff. I get that. Part of it may have been a little bit of loading up prior to amalgamation. That may have happened, I don't know, it could have happened. But we really do need to get to the situation where we have projects which are better planned in terms of knowing this is the staff we need. We are going to be able to deliver it in this phase. Otherwise, we just have this continual rollover. And in a financial sense, that's annoying, but in terms of the community, that's when our community get really pissed off. I think people have taken the news about the Ashfield pool not happening in this financial year fairly well. There was some disquiet in relation to a letter in the paper today, and I assume that Council's communication staff may in fact put a bit of a response back into the local rag in relation to that letter, because I took a few calls in relation to some of the an interesting take put by a disqualified previous councillor in the local rag today. But that distracts me from my main point. My main point is that I think as a council we need to be fair income about when we can achieve projects. We need to budget that accordingly, and we need to actually look at whether we have the staff and capacity to get the money out of the door in that time frame. Because if we don't, we aggravate a community, and those of us who hope to come back as councillors don't like the community being aggravated with us. So, Administrator, I recommend that both the reports be adopted, but I would like to hear the explanation in relation to the specific item I asked him about the capital adjustments for Ashfield.
Yep, so great, Mark, thank you very much. And so maybe Michael can address that issue now.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. Hopefully everyone can hear me. You're absolutely correct. What we've intended with this, the projects cannot be completed in the current financial year, so the year ending 30th of June. It's poorly worded, and I'll make sure we adjust that for the next time. Effectively, we're moving the projects from the current financial year to the following financial year for various reasons. Some of them will be that we just won't get the work done. Dealing with the second question, I believe it was, which was around our capacity to deliver, which is really important because one of the things that we don't want to do, and we've been talking very much about, is making sure that we budget for projects that we know we can deliver, promising what we can deliver, in some cases over-delivering, and making sure that we deliver what we said we were, rather than coming back every third or fourth quarter and saying, we can't do this anymore and we just don't have enough time to do anything. So our current budget is based on that premise. Now, it will probably take us a couple of years to get to the point where we're going to be really good at it. So this year will be possibly what I call a transitional year, where we might get really close, we might not, but we're going to learn a lot from it and we're going to get a lot better at it. But our intention, as we've been putting 17 to 18 budget together, is to make sure that we only put projects in that we can deliver.
And if I could just sort of add to that, it was one of my major concerns when I arrived that it was quite clear that for whatever reason, the list of capital projects was totally and utterly unattainable based on the averages of what three councils have been able to deliver in the previous years. So it was pretty obvious to everybody from here that we weren't going to deliver it. Two things will come that we'll be looking at. The first thing is, my intention is that we will budget for what we're going to do in a year, and that will be as accurate as we can make it. At the end of quarter 3, we will be telling the council this is what will be done in that period, and the group managers will be tasked with being within 5% of their quarter 3 projections for year end at the end of the year in terms of their performance. Projects, so we won't be looking at carryover in the same terminology that you've been previously used to. In the budget process, they will be allocated into the next year, but as part of that, through the community consultation, it could be that some other project might want to be brought forward and this one pushed well back. So we will actually revisit it. So things that are not done aren't guaranteed to be in the next year. That will be up to consultation and the political bodies deciding what they want to do. But the intention is that at the end of quarter 3, the group managers will be forecasting both in the OPEX and in the CAPEX side as to where they're going to be, and they have to be within plus or minus 5% of the number that they state. So you will see an improvement because that eventually will be live information that will go to the internet once we get the full Technology One suite in situ.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, everyone. We did have a couple of other speakers on this item. I had Frank Breen, I think, Frank Breen, did you want to speak on this item? And John as well. Yeah. And James at the back. We'll go with Frank.
Yes, thank you. My matters are similar to or related to what Mark was talking about, and I noticed that from my reading of the documents that we've got a total of over $33 million of adjustments that have been carried forward to the 17-18 year. And I gathered it's basically for those reasons that were outlined a short while ago, that we didn't have the capacity to do them, and other various reasons. That seems quite a lot considering our total budget is $270 million. It's quite a lot, and I'm just worrying about what the impact of that will be. Not only may we not have the capacity, and I don't understand really why we don't have the capacity because we contract out so much of our work. So it's not as if we're employing the staff to actually do a lot of this stuff. But on top of that, are we having difficulties in the future with meeting some of our ratios? Now, that's so very important when it comes to reporting that I'd like to think that we're going to be able to manage that. But on top of that is the question of these projects that are subject to the adjustments. There's a lot of them that reflect the that were priorities at the time for the councillors, and I'd like to council to consider how it's going to address those priorities now that they're postponed. Which ones are going to be postponed further, and which ones are going to get the green light. So I'd be interested in a process that the council will be following. If I can speak as a former LICAD councillor, we had a series of briefings, and which various options were being considered by council officers were provided to the councillors, and we were able to go away and consider those, and then at the next council meeting talk about our views on those particular options. So it does seem to me that this is a significant amount, and it is going to create a big problem for the year ahead. So that's my concerns. I'd be interested to hear how we're going to deal with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Generally our capacity to deliver capital works across if you look on average across the three former councils, about $40 to $50 million a year. That's what the history tells us. Up until the end of January, we're about 34 million spent, so we're sort of on track to deliver that again. In terms of prioritising the projects, they haven't dropped off the list. Some of the projects will be partly funded this year and partly funded next year. Other ones will be put in the mix for next year. Through the budget process, and we're proposing to have there'll be a number of consultations and opportunities through the budget process. We'll be engaging LRAC through that process, and part of that process will be our forward capital works program, which instead of seeing 1 year, it'll be 4 years. So you'll see the phasing of projects, you'll get an idea of where they sit within that 4 year time. Gives us a great opportunity to think more strategically in the delivery of our capital works in terms of capacity from year 1, 2, 3 and 4, that we can appropriately resource that. So that's probably been a big difference. If you have a look this year, you'll get a 4 year phase capital program that'll be part of the process. And obviously in year 1 of that capital program will be the projects that have been rephased from this year. And as Rick alluded to before, as we go through that process of engagement, we then prioritise and lock those in for the next financial year and the indication for the years forward.
And just recall that there are two other key components which we'll be looking at and you will be considering. One is there is a backlog in infrastructure, so in terms of CapEx we will be suggesting to the council that they should focus on backlog to start fixing that. Also remember that we've committed to $14 million of expenditure from the government funds, which has to be done in the next 3 years. So when you displace all of that, there may not be a hell of a lot, but that's going to be over for you guys to decide. We'll advise Richard on that down the track. I think there was one other point, but anyway, I'll forget the one.
John?
Just 3 questions, if I could. The first is in terms of future budgets. What impact will the Premier's announcement last year that for the next 3 years there'll be a cap on rates? What does that mean? And what impact do you think that might have on the revenue situation? The other thing is, I wonder if you could explain the 2 significant falls in the income, that is the operating grants and contributions, which fell by 10 million, and the capital grants and contributions, which fell by 13 million. So that's my second question. And my last one is, could someone explain what the VPA in Marrickville, the 9.6 million, in the Meriton site in Dulwich Hill, what that is and what those in-kind works were? So those 3 questions, I'll repeat them if you need.
If I work backwards, the 9.6 million was works in kind on the Meriton side. I believe there are units that we've received as part of the VPA that we had, so that's works in kind.
I think that's the cash contribution.
No, it was actually works in kind, not cash. The first question, part of the difficulty that we are going to have over the next 4 years or so with the rates being pegged and not being able to increase is we're going to have to make sure that we're very careful about what we do from an operating expenditure perspective and a capital expenditure perspective. We know we spend about $40 to $50 million plus the funding that we get from other places to make sure that we can deliver those. We will need to have a very strong cash flow forecast along with our P&L forecast to make sure that we have the money coming in, that we can actually afford to pay for everything that we're doing. It will mean that we'll have to be very tight over the next 3 to 4 years around any growth in expenditure, quite frankly.
Can I just repeat the question? So what does it mean to the average resident then over the next three years? That it's capped at CPI or it's
so,
no change?
For example, in the following year, it's going to be increasing by about 1.5%. And generally, I think they will come out every year at around
the standard rate cap will go up by this.
Does that answer the question?
Just one other point I just remember that I forgot to mention was the comment was made that we can, because we outsource, we can do an awful lot more. Well, the simple fact is you have to have staff to manage the contracts, run the tenders and do everything else, and we don't have those staff on board at this point in time. So that's one of the things we talk about. If we can find more revenue sources down the track, we'll get savings, and we may be able to afford to put those project managers and contract managers on board and do more of the CapEx work down the track. But that's a discussion to have with the LRAC and the council down the track.
And the other was the reduction in those. Yeah.
And to save time, I can actually walk you through those separately.
Right, thanks.
Yeah.
Darcy?
I just want to get a concur with all the positive remarks that have been made about the thoroughness of the report in comparison to previous reports. That's very good. The simple fact is, though, there's $33 million in capital infrastructure projects which are being deferred across the Inner West Council area. $33 million. Now, I know that includes Ashfield Pool, and that's a big project in and of itself, but putting everything else aside and whatever explanations and excuses there might be, and I don't disagree with some of the issues that have been raised, that's an enormous figure. I'd like to know, I've got a couple of questions. One is, what impact did the disruption in staffing that occurred as a consequence of the amalgamation have on the delay of some or any of that infrastructure pipeline? The answer can't be none, realistically, given that we know that none of the people who were previously the directors of infrastructure are still in those same positions now, and a number of them have left the council. That's my first question. My second question is the $10 million in open space projects, which the former Leichhardt Council went through the proper planning process to allocate prior to the amalgamation, which the new council has now endorsed and adopted. It would be a correct interpretation to say that given there's $6 million being pushed off in the former Leichhardt Council area into the next financial year, that it's unlikely that there's going to be much space for those additional projects that were endorsed by the previous council and by this council to be completed even in the following financial year. And my third question is, I concur with what the General Manager's just said, but is it really that difficult, like, to hire? We don't do any construction ourselves, we don't have builders anymore. Is it really that difficult to hire more people who can oversee tender processes and devise specifications and landscape plans, a couple of extra engineers so we can actually spend the money that we've got in the bank? I mean, maybe I'm misreading it and that's a simplification, but why don't you put them on? So they're my three questions.
The answer is it's very simple to hire somebody, put an ad in the paper and they respond and you pay them. The difficulty is we don't have the money to do that at this point in time because we still have all the existing complements of staff because of the fact that we have to retain staff in the 3 and the 5 year period, and we haven't had a lot of staff leave other than those senior ones that you've alluded to previously. So we're somewhat constrained by that. The simple fact of life is that yes, I agree the 33 million is a large amount, but I can safely say that had I been around in previous places I've worked, we would never have agreed to doing that sort of number over and above what we were capable of delivering. Each council always has a pretty much an average sort of amount of capex that they can deliver within the existing resource. Now, we have other mechanisms we can look at. We may be able to capitalise projects, in which case we can bring in a contract manager and capitalise that into it. That, of course, reduces the amount of money for the project. So there's various things which we can explore and we can look at, but the simple fact of life is, in this particular case, it was 30-odd plus million more than we could cope with. We've made it clear that's what it is. We'll put it all on the table, and as Michael said, we'll be looking to give you a 4-year rolling plan of the capital projects. Also, that will include the P&Ls for each of the business units, and you can determine which ones you want to determine in which year. The only caveats that I'm putting on that, is from our advice point of view, is simply where we believe that there is a requirement for a backlog of infrastructure or under the depreciation line. We will make sure that that money is prioritised, because clearly we don't want assets going backwards during that time. So we have got a period for the next 4 years, which we will come to you with in the draft budget period, and we'll talk to you about this is what we've got in our mind, but you are free to move that around. So in the future, what I expect to see is we deliver pretty much what we say we're going to do in a year. If for some reason a project is deferred or delayed, then we can bring a project forward. And again, the council can make that determination which project they may like to be brought forward. So it is always a place in the program which is movable around, but the total can't change because of our capability, unless we look at other means of funding extra resources out of manager.
Thank you for answering the third question. I accept your explanation that we don't have recurrent cash to put additional planners on. But if I could ask through you, Mr. Administrator, for the first 2 questions to be addressed, I'll just remind you of them. The first one was what impact the disruption to staffing through the amalgamation process has had on the infrastructure backlog, presuming that the answer can't be none. And secondly, whether, given the $6 million in displaced projects from the former Leichhardt Council area, which has been identified tonight, what impact that will have on the $10 million of open space projects which have been fully funded and endorsed by the former Leichhardt Council and the Inner West Council.
In relation, thank you. In relation to the Section 94 plan works from the former Leichhardt, some of those projects will be in next year, and we'll balance that up, and that'll be considered. So it doesn't mean none will be in. We're working up our draft capital programs at the moment. That is a serious consideration. But as I said, we'll have to look at it in terms of, as Rick said, in renewal. That's an important thing to look at. So at bread and butter infrastructure renewal, and in terms of the Stronger Communities Fund, the Section 94, and projects that already in this budget that we're sliding forward. So there'll be that opportunity, and that'll be a discussion engagement, because you'll see those projects be planned over the next 4 years, so you'll be able to see all projects. But some will fit into, I would envisage would fit into 17, 18. As I said, that'll be part of our discussion that we have with yourselves and with the community. In relation to capacity, I'm not going to nominate a figure on or how you determine the impact that the organisation's had on our capacity to deliver. I know that we've got a lot of we've got greater capacity in terms of expertise now to deliver projects than we've ever had, and we're working around it. What this is about today is a different way than we've been used to delivering our capital programs before. We wouldn't put a report like this forward in the past. We do our best to get it done, and it'd be considered a time of carryover. So that's just the way that the former councils used to operate, and this is more seriously about delivering and giving you the upfront commitment now that we're going to try and do our best to deliver what's remaining in the program. As Rick said, I've revisited it again in the third quarter, and as Michael said, that we're getting better and better. We'll get better and better at trying to get that timing right. So I can't put a figure on that. All I can say is we do have better resources than ever in order to try and do that and bring greater capacity for people, particularly like Wal and Kathy and Brooke that are around to deliver all of our capital works.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to insist on, I'm going to direct the question one more time to the only person who's actually had carriage of the organisation in their current position for the entirety of the amalgamation period, Mr Administrator. I'm not asking you to allocate a financial figure, I'm asking you to explain whether there has been some contribution to the infrastructure deferral, the $33 million worth of projects, whether the staffing reallocations and the restructuring that's occurred through the amalgamation process has had an impact on that. I'll leave it there. If you don't want to answer the question, that's fine, but I think it's a fair one.
No, this is my answer. I've been told we've delivered about $34 million worth of infrastructure projects so far this financial year. And on that basis, that is entirely commensurate with what the three former councils, in fact, it's probably a bit in advance of what the three former councils would deliver, bearing in mind that we deliver about $45 to $50 million per annum. I think the problem was, so on that basis, I would say none. The merger has had no, in fact, possibly a slight beneficial impact. But the problem was that we were loaded up with about $80 million worth of projects to deliver this financial year. When we took forward the
I can tell you who I got the recommendation to endorse that from, Peter Gainsford. Sorry, but honestly, like we sat around the budget table last year and you said, yep, here's the projects that we're going to do.
But it wasn't just Leichhardt, Darcy, it was Leichhardt.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're just throwing the former staff who are redundant under the bus and saying it's their fault?
No,
like,
we're not.
Seriously.
No, I'm not.
No, can I just...
Because Peter's still in the same position. Like, you're the one who recommended that we do the projects and now you're saying it was a bad recommendation.
It depends on the nature of the project. There's a whole range of reasons why some projects are deferred. Some that's due to community engagement, some they're impossible to deliver in the time frame, and we're pushing that forward now. But the people that are delivering the projects are all still in their jobs, working their way through that. So some projects are quite complex. Sometimes we allocate more funding in a financial year than we had. And last year there was extra renewal funding and extra requirement to try and do projects which are harder to probably deliver than the situation we ended up with. So that, you know, it's true. There are more capital projects than ever before. Councils were trying to deal with their backlog, you know, in a short time period to try and meet the future requirements.
Right. Okay. Thank you for that answer. I was just trying to get to the bottom of that. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Have we completed those two items? No. James wants to talk. James Gilronan, yep.
Well, I think I'm the last speaker and I don't want to hold everyone up. But I've heard a few comments about the positive amount of information in this report.
It's quite voluminous, isn't it?
Well, I've got some concerns about it. My concerns mostly stem from the fact that here is the council meeting publication, and item 16 represents a very small number of pages. Despite this, many of these pages were just skimmed over in a very short amount of time. Now the reason why I find that concerning is because item number 14 sets out very clearly a large number of investments that are made according to...
We haven't actually come to item 14 yet, James. Do you want to talk to item 14?
I had a feeling we'd skipped over it, but...
No, because we were dealing with 13 and 16 together because they were like reports.
Okay.
Happy to talk about item 14.
Well, it all relates together.
Yeah,
the investments in item 14 make up, what I can see in item 16, a very small amount of the income of the local government. And yet they get separated into all different kinds of investments. What I put to the council is that maybe in the interests of transparency and so that the residents and stakeholders, councillors, prospective councillors can have a good idea of what's going on behind these budget figures, is some kind of breakdown of where all the money's coming from in this report. I see there's changes in some of these figures, such as the 300,000 increased swimming school income, which seems like a lot. Now, I don't know too much about it, but if the council was, for example, spending money on constructing a pool and then getting an income from it, that would be an investment, and you'd be able to look at how much money went into that project and how much is coming out. You'd be able to get a good figure of the return. However, there's no information that I can find in this report that relates the income to the amount invested on those projects, and I think it would be useful for everyone to have that kind of information in the report, especially for discussing the relevance of different projects. And I just feel like it's upsetting when I look at all of this information in item number 14, all of it which is set out in terms of a return, except none of it that really relates back to our local area and projects that we're doing to not only get a financial return, but also put money into the community to create services. So that's just a comment I'd like to make. Thanks.
Yeah. Probably comparing different things, but I might ask Michael to respond.
So I think if we address item 14, that really talks about where the money that council has is invested. Largely council's investment policy is around capital preservation. We want to make sure that the money that we get from various grants and various places, plus the money that we have saved up for capital projects that perhaps have been deferred, which we need to make sure that are there to pay vendors, are invested in and we have a very strict investment policy, and it's legislated. We cannot invest in places like shares. We don't invest to make a return. We invest our money to make sure that it's preserved capital, and we have a very large fossil fuel focus based on previous resolutions of council. And I'll leave the fossil fuel focus right now because that'll be addressed possibly later in another question. But effectively, the investments just list out where our money is, just to make sure that we're providing due process to everyone to know that they're not being invested in a random place that we may have risk. It's all about risk management. In terms of 13 and 16, the quarterly budget reviews, that really talks about how council's money is being used and where we're getting the money from. So for example, our increase in Learn to Swim fees in Ashfield, because our Learn to Swim program has been doing a lot better than what we anticipated it had. So we have a lot more students there, and so we're getting a lot more fees coming out of that. But basically, council isn't in the business of making money. It's about stewardship of the money that we receive from local residents and applying those into the right places and the right investments, as discussed with our local representatives and agreed upon in the right forums. I think that should answer.
Apropos the earlier conversation that went on, we intend to be able to be monthly reporting via the internet the P&L that each of our service units, such as childcare, such as aquatics, pools, the group manager responsible will be required to explain the variances in their little snapshot on that particular area. Also the capital projects that they are responsible for, they will be listed, and the project manager running that will be required to report to the internet or to the community and everybody, I guess, exactly what the status of the project is, how it's going against schedule, whether it's behind schedule, ahead of schedule, whether it's behind on budget, ahead of budget, and to explain those variances for every project that is listed in our community strategic plan. So we intend to have that within 2 years, which is going to take us that long to get all the reporting structures set up, but then anybody will be able to go on and look at the status of the new childcare centre that's being built, how childcare is performing in terms of income and expenditure, and so on. So that's the world we're looking to get to. It will be very different, and it will mean that the community will be far more aware of what is happening in capital projects and operating budgets and expenditure for service units, where, apropos that earlier conversation when you heard that there was a very large people have eyes a little bit bigger than their tummy about what they could actually cope with. So that will all become crystal clear as we sort all that out, and it's put forward, and then it'll be just monitored. And the political side will have the opportunity to change and play around with that, but it'll be instantly available to the community to see what their decisions have been.
Okay, thanks, Rick. So just to get us back on track, items 13 and 16, which we considered sequentially, I adopt those recommendations. So we've dealt with items 13 and 16. We have item 14, which is the investments item, but we also have, I think, item 13, no. There is another item we haven't dealt with.
15.
Item 15. Item 15, which is the disclosures of interest, and I don't have any speakers on that. And we have those disclosures to table from the two recently appointed deputy general managers, and so I received a report. We've dealt with item 15. Means the only item left to deal with is item 14, which James briefly spoke to. I think Frank also wanted to speak to item 14. Did anybody else want to speak to item 14? No? So Frank, and then we'll respond to Frank, and thanks, Frank.
Thank you. Yes, I appreciate the report showing the environmental commitments on page 1251 of the papers, and we're up to 57% as a combined council, the Inner West Council being non-fossil fuel investments, but I was hoping that we might be able to get an idea of when we're going to get to, 60, 70, 80, whatever percent. So I appreciate that it relies on the turnover of the investments, and so it'd be good if we could paint a bit of a picture of if we're ever going to get to the 100% and what sort of timeline we've got. So I'd suggest that Council have a look at that and provide that in future reports.
I've been working very closely with our investment advisors to look at the potential to move our non-fossil fuel investment portfolio. It's something that I want to take to our, hopefully I'll get the acronym right, our local representative advisory committee to work through, because it might require a change in our investment focus. Our investment focus is about capital preservation. If we want to move it to a significantly larger number, then we need to change our policy such that its focus isn't purely around capital preservation, because for us to increase our non-fossil fuel investment exposure significantly more than currently around the 57 to 60%, we'll need to move largely to Tier 2 banking institutions, which changes our risk profile. It changes it from investing in organisations that have a very high control process to, I guess, institutions that are rated as adequate control processes, which I think poses a fairly large risk. What we will do is look at exactly that. Can we get to a 60 to 65? And at what point does it change our risk portfolio and our investment policy from capital preservation to something else? So that's something I wanted to bring to the LRAC.
Okay, thank you very much. Look forward to that discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. And I've received a note that report, so adopt that recommendation. And I do believe that concludes the council meeting. I thank everyone for attending, and particularly the hardcore that's made it to the end. Thank you, one and all.
Thank you.
And thank you to the staff.
Good night. Good night.
Thanks. Thank you, Jill. Thank you.